Hello, and thank you for choosing this full length, clean, historical Western romance by Kat Lynn. We are so happy to have you with us today. Before we begin, don't forget to tap the subscribe button and like and share with your friends. Your support allows us to continue sharing these sweet, heartwarming stories for free. Now, relax and get ready to travel back in time to the American frontier, where we join an adventure to find love and happily ever after. Enjoy. Copyright of Kat Lynn. Dreams of Sharing Serenity. Rainbow Falls Brides, Book 7, Chapter 1. Amelia's hair whipped around her in the warm afternoon sun as she skipped lightly from the post office. There was a small jig in her steps, a beaming smile that rivaled that of the summer sun. In her hands were letters, which she held closely to her bosom, smiling sheepishly. The letters were from Thomas Pearson and Ethan Garrett, whom she and her twin sister Ursula had written to after they saw a poster they made about looking for mail-order brides. The sisters had concluded that their living conditions didn't afford them much other choice, and the promise of a better life through marriage seemed thrilling. They had written to these men, hoping for a chance at a new beginning. Almost as if the universe, and perhaps their mother who died recently of consumption, had been looking out for them. Both of these men were ranchers from Rainbow Falls. They wouldn't have to worry about leaving each other. The prospect was beyond exciting for the sisters. Now, a few weeks after they wrote letters to them, they had finally received responses. Amelia was excited to get home to read the letter from Thomas Pearson and hand her sister Ethan's own. She didn't notice the hem of her dress sweeping the dirty streets while she walked hastily. "Reckon we should get hitched, pretty girl." A large hand shot out, attempting to grab her as she made her way along the bustling street that meandered up to the tenement building where she lived with her sister. Amelia managed to sidestep his grasp with a quick shuffle of her feet, her heart pounding with fear and revulsion. Her brows knitted together in irritation as she glanced up at the rotund man. His leering grin revealed a set of jagged teeth, the result of too many brawls in the taverns of the Lower East Side. His coarse hands, stained with dried blood and the grime of a day's labor, spoke of his trade, a butcher's work. "Seen you about these parts," he drawled, his voice rough and laden with a crude accent. "You're ripe for marriage and ready to start a family. I bring home a fair wage, and we could have ourselves a little one, maybe with eyes as blue as the summer sky, just like their mama." His words were a jarring intrusion, and Amelia quickened her pace, clutching the letters more tightly as if they might shield her from his gaze. The look in his eyes, roving over her like she were a slab of meat waiting for the cleaver, made her skin prickle with unease. "Think you're too good for me, don't you?" The butcher's taunting voice followed her down the crowded street. "Running off like you've got a dozen suitors lining up, just 'cause you fancy yourself above me." A flush of embarrassment crept up Amelia's cheeks, her face burning beneath the scrutiny of curious onlookers. Her hands tightened around the letters. It was a lifeline out of the chaos of the Lower East Side. She hoped that she could leave for Rainbow Falls quickly and get married to Thomas Pearson. Finally, the grimy tenement where she lived with her sister came into sight. The old building sagged with age, its brickwork chipped and stained from countless seasons of wear. Amelia's steps slowed as she approached the cramped doorway, flanked by makeshift piles of discarded items, buckets, old crates, and the occasional broken chair, testaments to the building's severe overcrowding. She gingerly stepped around the cluttered space with practiced ease. The tenement was just as loud as the streets outside. She clicked her tongue as she made her way up the narrow staircase. The tenement grew louder with the cacophony of babies crying echoing down the hallways, mingling with the sharp reprimands of mothers to their disobedient children, and the constant yelling between disgruntled couples. Healing. It was all a relentless reminder of the life she yearned to leave behind. "Out of the way, miss! Out of the way, miss!" A group of children screamed excitedly behind her as they chased a large rat which scurried quickly to save its life. Amelia stepped aside, unfazed by the scene before her. It was a regular occurrence. The air in the building was pungent. the aroma of freshly baked cookies blended with the smell of boiled cabbages and burning coal. It was a stench that seemed to permanently cling to the poorly ventilated building. Amelia wrinkled her nose as she climbed up the rickety stairs to the apartment she shared with her sister. Every step she took on the wooden surface produced a loud sound like that of a cupboard being opened after many years. The old hinges of the door whined in protest as she pushed it open. The apartment greeted her with its familiar dampness. In a corner of the room were leftovers from the previous night's dinner of dried bread and flat braize. She made a mental note to dispose of it. Exhausted, Amelia made her way across the crooked floorboards that groaned with every step she took and collapsed into the worn-out chair in the room. Her heart thumped slightly as she placed the letters on the table before her. The envelopes were slightly squeezed and damp with streaks of sweat, a testament to her tight grip on them as she ran home. Each letter represented a potential escape from this life for her and Ursula, a glimmer of hope in her otherwise dreary existence. She carefully opened the first envelope with anticipation, her eyes scanning the white paper as she took a steadying breath. Sunlight filtered through the sagging fabric hung on the window, illuminating the otherwise dim room with a soft glow. Unfolding the letter with trembling fingers, Amelia began to read. Dear Miss Amelia, I trust this letter finds you in good health. Thank you for your kind response to the ad I placed for a bride. Though we have yet to meet, I enjoyed reading your letter, and I am eager to share a bit about my life here. My name is Thomas Pearson, and I am a rancher from a beautiful small town in Montana called Rainbow Falls. My family owns a large ranch, which I oversee with much love and passionate toil. The land stretches wide with fields of grass that turn golden in the summer. It is always a beauty to witness the passage of seasons on the ranch. The work on the ranch is hard but honest. Indeed, there is great pride in working the land, knowing that my efforts sustain our livelihood. Evenings are my favorite, when the sky is painted with the colorful hues of the setting sun and the stars begin to twinkle above. I know that the small-town life of Rainbow Falls may seem wild to a young woman like you, who has lived all her life in the big city. Yet life here is peaceful and steady. It's a place where one can breathe deeply, where the air is clean, and where the nights are filled with serenity. If it is your will, Miss Amelia, I hope it is. I dream of sharing this life with you. I assure you that I will be a reliable husband to you and a loving father to any children we may have. I understand that leaving all you know behind is no small step, but I promise you will be cared for and well treated. Together, we can build a life we'd both cherish. I eagerly await your reply, and if all goes well, the possibility of welcoming you to the Pearson family. Sincerely, Thomas Pearson. Amelia's heart swelled with hope as she read the words. Thomas's vivid descriptions transported her from her cramped apartment to the promising town of Rainbow Falls. She read the letter again and again, sighing as she curled her legs into the chair. She could almost see the fields, feel the gentle breeze on her face, and hear the peaceful sounds of the ranch. She imagined Thomas, tall, handsome, as they sat together, her head on his broad chest as he told her stories under the night sky. For the first time in a long while, Amelia allowed herself to dream of a different life, a life where peace and beauty were within reach. Amelia, Ursula called, shattering Amelia's daydream as she pushed the door open. She carried a bag with another pile of laundry for them to wash. Ever since the button factory shut down, they had taken their mother's job of doing laundry, but it barely provided for their daily living. To Amelia, it was like busting your humps out for peanuts. Heaven knows she was done with it. What are you doing? Come on, we have work to get to, Ursula said as she threw the pile of laundry on the floor. Forget this for now, Amelia said, beaming as she handed Ursula the letter from Ethan Garrett. Here, he wrote back. Ursula's eyes widened. He did? Amelia nodded excitedly, her hair bouncing with the motion. She watched with bated breath as Ursula tore the letter open with trembling hands. As Ursula read on, her face lit up and a shy smile crept on her face. Amelia's heart leaped. Her sister was satisfied with Ethan Garrett. They would be going to Rainbow Falls. The train hissed as it began to chug slowly from the station. Large balls of steam went up as its powerful engine huffed and puffed, mingling with the hazy morning air. The clickety-clack of the wheels against the tracks echoed throughout the railway. It was a comforting sound that signaled their departure from the clamor of New York. Outside, families hugged and waved their hands, saying their farewells to their loved ones aboard the train. Close by, traders were walking about frantically and yelling loudly to peddle their merchandise to last-minute customers. The sound of the train leaving filled Amelia with excitement. Her eyes twinkled with a hopeful gleam. Her only family was here. Her gaze drifted to Ursula, who was staring out with a somber expression as if trying to etch the last glimpses of the city into her memory. Amelia reached out to squeeze her hands. The sisters had weathered many storms together, and now they faced a new chapter side by side. Ursula turned to her with a bittersweet smile. "I wish Ma was alive to see this. Ma would be very happy. She loved this city, but she always yearned for a more quiet life." Ursula nodded. They both fell silent, lost in their thoughts. Memories of their childhood with their mother flooded Amelia's mind. She remembered the way her mother used to sing to them, her voice filled with warmth and love, the way she'd tell stories about their father, who had died at sea before they were born. "Remember when Ma took us to this train station and told us stories about how she always waited for Father when he was returning from his travels?" The twins laughed. "I wish I got to know him," Amelia said, her heart heavy with grief and longing for a man she'd never gotten the chance to know. "He seemed like a good man." Amelia sighed. Ma loved their father so much that she refused to remarry. She always said no one could compare to him. Amelia wished she could experience love like that. Her dream was almost in her grasp. She could have that with Thomas. Her heavy heart lightened, and she smiled. The sisters looked outside through the window, watching the terrain change from recognizable to unfamiliar. "Do you think we're doing the right thing, leaving everything behind?" Ursula asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "We're doing what we have to, Ursula. This is our chance at a new life, a better life. Ma would have wanted us to be happy." "Yes," Ursula smiled. "Luck is on our side, isn't it? Two ranchers in the same town." Amelia's eyes sparkled. "It indeed is. We'll live a beautiful life." Amelia closed her eyes as she imagined her new life in Rainbow Falls. She wondered if Thomas was as pleasant in person as he was in his letters. She hoped he was. She dreamed of a cozy and quaint house with a porch where she and Thomas could spend nights reading together and looking up at the stars twinkling in the night sky. She smiled as she pictured herself and Ursula having dinners together with their husbands. They would remain as close as always, and when they bore children, their family would be just as close. The chugging of the train became a soothing melody, lulling her to sleep. In her dreams, she and Thomas would grow old together, loving each other more deeply with each passing year. Any challenges that came their way would be faced hand in hand, just like her parents had. A peaceful sigh escaped her as she slept. Rainbow Falls and all its promise of a bright future was enough to make Amelia happy. Chapter 2. "Hey, come on now." Thomas rubbed Little Jet's ear, coaxing her to graze. Little Jet was an ironic name for a large cow, but Little Jet had lived on the Pearson Ranch since she was born. The beautiful brown cow with specks of white on her body had grown and borne calves, but she seemed to be struggling after her recent birth. "That's a good girl." Thomas patted her as she grazed with less vigor than usual. "I see what you were talking about. She's ill." He turned to his foreman, Hank. Hank shook his head as he looked at Little Jet, her ears twitching and her eyes wary. "The birth's been tough on her, especially with the death of Sire." Sire was Little Jet's friend. The two had been inseparable. "Keep an eye on her. Peter should come check on her tomorrow." He nodded. "Will do, sir." Thomas was supervising the ranch that morning. The sun had just ascended high up in the sky, casting radiant beams and illuminating the fields and hills that stretched as wide as eyes could see with a clear light. The ranch hands worked with vitality and practiced ease as they moved the animals from one paddock to another. A sense of pride washed over Thomas as he listened to the gentle lowing of the cattle, mingling with the neighing of horses, the occasional bark of shepherd dogs, and the peaceful whooshing of the stream nearby. He had done a great job with the ranch, and his father would be proud, he was certain. He observed as the ranch hands led the cattle to the stream. Their coats shone in the warm glow of the sun as they followed eagerly, their thirst evident after a morning of grazing. "Easy now, lads," Hank called out, his voice carrying authority and gentleness as he addressed the ranch hands. "Keep 'em moving steady. We don't want no heifers falling behind." Hank was a capable foreman. He was just a few years older than Thomas, but he looked older with his burly body, bald head, and full mustache. He had a perpetual squint on his sun-beaten face. Hank had been working on ranches for a long time, and when Thomas needed a foreman, he stuck out for his keenness and expertise. Thomas's boots kicked off small puffs of dust as they strode along the fence together. His hat, though well-worn but beloved, it was the same one that his father wore while he tended to the ranch, shielded his face from the bright sun with its wide brim, allowing him to supervise the activities without squinting. "If you don't mind my prying, Mr. Pearson, sir, what's the feud between you and Ethan Garrett?" Hank asked, with a concerned look, squinting even more as he looked at Thomas. "The man's been claiming the stream borders his ranch now, says it belongs to the Garretts." A surge of anger coursed through Thomas at the mention of Ethan Garrett. His jaw tightened and his gaze hardened as he looked at the stream shimmering in the sunlight. It flowed peacefully along the boundary of his land, oblivious to the dispute. He never thought he'd see Ethan Garrett again after he left town all those years ago. Now he was back, rugged as his father, but richer. A lot richer. Ethan appeared to have struck gold in his travels and was hungry to reignite a generational feud with his outrageous claim. "He must be crazy as a loon if he thinks I'm going to let him claim this stream as his." Thomas's hands clenched into a fist as he spoke. "The Pearson Ranch has always led animals to drink from this stream. My father used it, and I've been using it ever since I took over the ranch. Ethan Garrett's got no right to claim." Hank clicked his tongue as he shifted his weight from one foot to another. "We all know your family's been using this stream, and you're determined to keep it in the family. Moreover, Ethan's been gone for years. He arrived in town only a few months ago, but he's wasted no time in stirring trouble." "If he wants trouble, then he'll get it." Thomas's gaze turned to the animals. The ranch hands were leading them away from the stream and back to the barn. The animals moved leisurely, satisfied after quenching their thirst. When he turned to Hank, he spoke through gritted teeth. "The stream's vital for the livestock, and I'll not see it taken from me, Hank. I'll not let it get into the hands of Ethan. I'm hell-bent on fighting him and doing whatever it takes to keep it." Hank patted his shoulder with a large, calloused hand. "Good man." They walked back to the ranch in silence. The only sounds were those of the cattle lowing in satisfaction and the ranch hands coaxing them to move. As they passed by the haystack, Hank said, "We're running out of hay, which is another matter I wanted to let you know about. We've got just about enough for a few days left." Thomas frowned as he looked at the haystack, calculating the available options in his mind. Indeed, their supply was dwindling, and they had only a few days' supply. "We'll have to wait for Joel Silvers to arrive back in town. He's in Vine Valley on some business. Joel's got the best quality of hay, corn, and oats." Hank scratched his chin, unsure. "Are you sure we can wait long for him to arrive before we run out?" "If we run out, we won't," he said. "We've gotten by on good quality so far. We won't take anything less. Joel should arrive within the week, and we'll get our regular supply." "If you say so, sir." "Don't worry, Hank." Thomas clamped his hands on Hank's shoulders. "I know you're looking out for the ranch, but we'll get by with what we have. Keep the men focused on their tasks." Hank nodded. "The sun's high in the sky. The boys can take a break and gather for lunch. They've done well." With that, he turned from Hank and made his way to the main house. Beads of sweat trickled down his back, causing his shirt to cling to his body. As he walked, his mind was already plotting ways to protect his land and further the well-being of his ranch. The voices of his family members grew louder as he neared the main house. The house was large, with whitewashed walls and a wraparound porch. Sarah, his sister, was talking to his Uncle Joe. Their voices carried over the house. His stomach grumbled as he entered the house, the warm aroma of freshly baked bread wafting through the air. He made his way to the kitchen, where Sarah and Uncle Joe were. Uncle Joe threw a small portion into his mouth, nodding as he listened to her. Thomas shook his head at him. "I heard more male brides are coming into town within the month. The young men in town are excited," she sighed. "Perhaps my dear brother can find himself a wife as well instead of—" "Something sure does smell nice here," Thomas said, cutting her off as he walked to take a piece of bread. Her brows furrowed in mock annoyance as she stopped him with a hand on his wrist and pushed away his hand. Her apron was dusted in flour, and specks of flour were in her wavy blonde hair. "Indeed it does, Thomas. No stealing of my precious bread and toil before it's served for all," Thomas chuckled. He knew his sister was about to make this into another of her many complaints about him not having a wife yet, but he decided to humor her today. "Now why? Uncle Joe's been stealing as you bake. Uncle Joe's an old man with a wife and children. You, on the other hand, have refused to get yourself a wife," Thomas chuckled. "So I won't get a taste of your fine bread until I get myself a wife? Yes, can't have me slaving in the kitchen for your belly while you're out there playing cowboy." "Nobody's got you slaving in the kitchen, Sarah." He grabbed a piece of bread as she turned to take a bowl. Uncle Joe chuckled under his breath. "We have a cook, remember? And someone's got to keep the ranch running to sustain all our bellies." Sarah clucked her tongue as she waved him off. Of course, of course. Sarah was Thomas's younger sister, but she loved to fuss around him and act like the mother of the house. He was protective of her as his only sibling and gave in to her will most of the time. Her husband died shortly after they got married, and she had lived with him ever since. She handed him a loaf of bread, sighing as she did. "Rachel's setting the table for lunch. But Thomas, you can't keep going like this. You need to get someone to take care of you and bear your little ones. You need a wife. Uncle Joe, tell him. Maybe he'll listen to you." Thomas closed his eyes as he chewed to savor the buttery taste of the bread in his mouth. Sarah made the best bread. It tasted just like their mother's. Uncle Joe shrugged. "Thomas has got a good head on his shoulders. He knows what he wants. But your sister is right. You need a wife, Thomas. You're tall and hard-working, and the women love you. You merely need to pick a bride." "Thank you, Uncle Joe." He glanced at them with a smile as he continued. "I've got it handled." "How?" Sarah shook her head, removing her apron as she began to tidy the kitchen. "You say that every time and then nothing." "Sarah, I have." Thomas grinned. "I've got myself a bride." Silence fell in the kitchen the moment Thomas's words sunk in. Sarah's mouth hung open as she turned to Uncle Joe, who looked incredulous. For that moment, Sarah was rendered speechless, a rare occurrence indeed for her. "Thomas, what?" Shock and disbelief colored her face. Thomas leaned against the door, enjoying his sister's shock at the news. "It's true. I sent for a mail-order bride, a young woman called Amelia, and we exchanged letters." He looked outside to determine the time. "She should be arriving soon? She's coming to Rainbow Falls today?" Her shock shifted to excitement, and her oval face lit up. Sarah began to dance around, clapping her hands together in happiness. "Why didn't you tell me anything sooner? I'd have prepared a large meal and made sure everyone knew a Pearson bride was coming to town." Thomas laughed at his sister's enthusiasm. "I didn't want you to do any of that. I just wanted to surprise you and the family." "It's a pleasant surprise." Uncle Joe chipped in, clapping a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Congratulations, Thomas. We're going to receive her together, but first, you've got to clean up. We can't have her thinking she's marrying a wild horse." Thomas grinned. "All right." A sense of anticipation bubbled within Thomas as he headed for the stairs. He was excited to meet Amelia, his mail-order bride. It was the beginning of a new chapter in his life, and while the thought of change made his heart thump with crippling anxiety, he couldn't help but feel genuine happiness at this moment. Thomas's breath caught in his chest as he saw her. Her long brown hair danced softly in the air as she stepped out of the train, her eyes darting around. She was slender and fair, with blue eyes that put the Rainbow Falls skies to shame and pouty red lips as if stained by Merlot. Her dress draped elegantly around her slim figure, the hem making a crown at her feet. She was beautiful. There was a shyness in the way she stood that he found endearing. He watched from his carriage as she whispered something to the woman next to her. "That must be her sister, Ursula," he whispered to Sarah. "She's a twin." Samson, prosody. Sarah's eyes widened as she looked at them. Thomas smiled. "Come on, let's receive them." They made their way to them. "Good afternoon, ladies," Thomas said, flashing a charming smile. "I'm Thomas Pearson. I assume you must be Amelia." A shy smile bloomed on Amelia's face, and a flush crept its way up her cheeks as she managed to say, "Yes." Thomas smiled and tipped his hat to her sister. "And you must be Ursula." Sarah got down from the carriage and introduced herself. Then, an unexpected thing happened. Ethan Garrett appeared from nowhere and declared himself Ursula's groom. Thomas's eyes narrowed at his presence and his arrogance in declaring that he'd marry Ursula immediately. He was sure that Ethan was trying to make himself look better. He gritted his teeth. He was going to marry Amelia anyway. Thomas turned to Amelia, holding out his hand to her. "Come along, Amelia. We should get going." Amelia took his hand without a word, her eyes holding on to her sister. Thomas felt sorry for her. He knew from her letters that she and her sister were close and they were each other's only family left. Yet the thought of having Ethan Garrett as a family bothered him. His brows creased to a deep frown. He pushed the thought aside as it came. He shouldn't let Ethan soil this moment with his bride-to-be. Today was a happy day. Thomas turned to Amelia. She sat quietly opposite him on the carriage, beside his sister, who was talking her ears off. She looked up, and their gazes met. Her mouth curled into a shy smile, and she turned away after a moment. "Will we be getting married now?" she asked, glancing at him. Before he could answer, Sarah cut in. "No, we'll have a huge wedding. It'll be the talk of the town for years to come. Everyone in Rainbow Falls will be there." Amelia's eyes widened at that. She turned to Thomas, but he only smiled. Sarah filled the silence with chatter on the way home, pointing out all the buildings in town to Amelia. "See, there is old Pat's store." She pointed to a quaint store with a freshly painted sign announcing Old Pat's Flower and Pastry Shop. "He has the freshest flowers in town and the most watering cookies. People say he started the store as a reason to live after his wife left him for another man years ago. He has no one with him but his dog. Well, the people in town love him, but I think poor Mrs. Hattie loves him more with the way she keeps spending all her time there." At that moment, Mrs. Hattie, a small older woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair and a bright smile, happened to pass by. "Ah, see, just as I said, there is Mrs. Hattie, going by old Pat's store again with a basket of food." She clicked her tongue, laughter bubbling in her voice. "Ain't that Thomas Pearson?" A man with a rough voice called as their carriage passed by. It was Buck, a jolly farmer who always had a smile and a greeting for everyone. "Good day, Buck," Thomas said with a slight tip of his hat. "I'll be seeing you soon. We've got some business to discuss." "Certainly. Good day, Miss Pearson." Buck greeted Sarah, tipping his hat with a glint in his eye. Sarah waved as she greeted him. She turned to Amelia. "That was Buck. Did you see his eyes? He lost the other one in a shootout with outlaws, but he's a good man." On and on Sarah went, pointing more buildings out and telling more gossip. Thomas couldn't help but feel bad for Amelia as he saw her shoulders droop. He could sense that she was exhausted from the journey and felt out of place, but he attributed this to being separated from her sister just as they arrived in Rainbow Falls. The thought that Sarah's chatty but well-meaning self might be overwhelming for her didn't occur to him. After all, his sister was only trying to get acquainted with his bride-to-be. Thomas smiled at her, his fingers rubbing her hands reassuringly. Her skin was soft under his touch, almost bearing no signs of the tough life she had led in New York. "You're welcome here, Amelia. We'll live a happy and peaceful life." Thomas's throat constricted with emotion as he said this. "Nothing will ruin this." It was a vow to her and to himself. Chapter 3. Sarah Pearson was overwhelming. Amelia zoned out, while Sarah kept telling her gossip about people in town, the incessant chatter fading into the background of her thoughts. It was all a little too much for her. Amelia wished Thomas had come alone so they could have a moment. She wanted to talk to him. Her eyes flickered to Thomas. The the man she had traveled so far to meet and marry, and her heart skipped a beat when his eyes lifted to meet hers. Warm, fuzzy feelings spread within her at the eye contact, and then he smiled that beautiful smile. Thomas Pearson was as masculine as can be. He was tall with long locks of dark hair. His features were sharp and handsome, with piercing silver eyes that seemed to draw her into their depths, and a strong, broad chest from working on his ranch. He had the air of a dignified man about him. Even his carriage was grand. Just as she thought this, Sarah announced loudly, "And there's our ranch just up ahead." Amelia gazed out ahead at the sweeping acres of land that ran wide into the hills. Her eyes widened in astonishment at the large house that came into view. The carriage galloped into the wooden gates of the ranch. Indeed, there was a porch where she and Thomas could fulfill her dreams of looking at the night sky and the twinkling stars with her head on his broad shoulders. But the house was large. She had expected a modest house, one that was small and quaint. Grand with gleaming whitewashed walls, the wooden structure stood tall and imposing, its wide porch spreading invitingly. There were smaller houses at the end of the large one. The ranch was vast. At that moment, it started to strike Amelia that Thomas Pearson was a wealthy rancher. "Isn't it beautiful?" Sarah grinned. "It is. The ranch is lovely. I'll show you around," she continued. "There are so many places to know, so many people to meet." Amelia smiled stiffly at her. The carriage rolled to a stop in front of the large house. "Welcome to the Rainbow Falls and welcome home," Thomas said, smiling, stretching his hands out for her to take as she stepped out of the carriage. Home. The words sent a ripple of warmth through her. Thomas was right. This was her new home. She said a little prayer as she took his hand, hoping that this place would bring her happiness and love. She closed her eyes and inhaled the air. It was crisp and fresh, unlike the musty air of the Lower East Side. "Welcome to the ranch, miss." A chorus of cheerful young voices greeted her, breaking her reverie. Amelia opened her eyes to see a group of children huddled together to greet her, their eyes alight with curiosity and excitement. "Thank you." She smiled warmly at them, surprised but touched by their kindness. She could see the family resemblance in their bright eyes as they began asking her questions, each of them vying for her attention and eager to introduce themselves. Before she could say more, an older man and woman appeared from one of the smaller houses, their smiles broad as they approached. "That's our Uncle Joe and his wife Martha," Sarah said. Uncle Joe was a stout fellow with a lopsided grin on his face that gave an inkling that he must have been a menace back in his youth. He had twinkling silver eyes just like Thomas's. "Welcome, dear," his wife, Martha, said, enveloping Amelia in a matronly hug. "We're pleased to have you join the family." Amelia smiled politely. The introductions continued, and the number of people who appeared to welcome her seemed endless. She met the cook, the maid, the housekeeper, and even some of the ranch hands dropped by to welcome her, their faces full of excitement at seeing her. She scanned the yard looking for Thomas, but he was gone. Where had he gone? She suddenly felt lonely amid the people and pleasantries. "I've not seen Thomas since we arrived," Amelia said to Sarah. "His shipment from the east just arrived. He went with some men to receive it," she explained, joking as she continued. "Today's a day for lots of new arrivals from the east, it seems." Everyone burst into raucous laughter at that. "Indeed, indeed," Uncle Joe grinned. Amelia's eyes dropped to the floor, a shy smile on her face as color rushed to her cheeks at their words. "Come along, Amelia," Sarah said, holding her hand. "Let me show you around the house." Sarah's voice, animated and ceaseless, became a constant murmur in Amelia's ears as she led her from one room to another. Amelia nodded absent-mindedly, the cacophony of sounds and information quickly becoming too much for her to focus on. She found herself retreating to the quiet chambers of her mind. She wished for a moment of solitude to catch her breath. After a round of walking around the house, Sarah finally brought her to the room she would be staying in. The room was larger than the apartment she lived in for so long on the Lower East Side. She sucked in a breath, her eyes darting around as she took in the beauty of the room. The wallpaper that adorned the room was of beautiful floral patterns, whispering tales of bygone eras. Across the room was a writing desk, where a fresh stack of brown parchment papers and an inkwell were neatly arranged. Beside it, a small, narrow bookcase was filled with an array of books. Amelia's heart soared at the sight. As someone who didn't enjoy the company of most people, Amelia grew up spending most of her time reading, getting lost in the fantasies hidden in books. A colorful rug lay at the foot of the bed, and the soft glow of the setting sun streamed through the lace curtain, adding a charming ambiance to the room. "And here is your room. I hope you find it to your liking." Sarah smiled broadly, leading her into the room with a flourish. The only belongings Amelia brought from New York, a small bag that contained a few dresses and the letters from Thomas, were already in the room. The room was clean, and Amelia had never been more pleased to see a bed than at that moment. The elegant four-poster bed dominated the room. The soft quilts were inviting, and she felt her body urging her to take a rest. Before that, though, Amelia needed to know about the rivalry between Thomas and her sister's husband, Ethan. The tension between the two men at the train station was unmistakable. She had seen the way Thomas's jaw tightened and the angry look in Ethan's eyes when they both met. The thought that their feud might affect the closeness she shares with Ursula worried her. She and Ursula had been so excited to build a close bond between their families in Rainbow Falls. Things were looking to be different now that the husbands-to-be hated each other. "Sarah, I noticed the tension between Thomas and Ethan at the train station. What can you tell me about it?" Sarah's smile faltered for a brief moment before she said in an overly enthusiastic voice, "Now, don't you trouble yourself with that. It's just men being men." She continued with a dismissive wave of her hand before steering Amelia to the bed. "We've got more important matters to discuss." Amelia opened her mouth to press further, but Sarah was already walking to the door. "I'll have the maid prepare hot water for you to bathe, and you can come down for supper when you're ready. The journey was long, and you must be fatigued. Not to worry, we'll discuss more after you've rested." With that, Sarah closed the door softly behind her. Alone for the first time that day, Amelia fell onto the soft bed in exhaustion. She curled her legs and closed her eyes, letting the silence wrap around her like a shawl. The quilt embraced her, and she knew she was lucky to have a room like this to herself. The room was far more beautiful and elegant than any she'd ever been in. Yet her mind raced. She couldn't seem to hold a thought for long before another worry slithered in. She missed her sister. She hoped Ursula was doing well with Ethan, and she wondered if Ethan married her immediately, as he announced at the train station. Thomas's glare at Ethan and Ethan's curt responses flashed through her mind again. It didn't help that both of the men she and her sister would be married to couldn't seem to stand each other. She sighed, contemplating what the cause of their rift was. Sarah didn't seem willing to discuss the matter. A loud rasp of laughter from downstairs, mixed with sharp tones of scolding from the adults and children, cut through her reverie. She blinked her eyes open in resignation. The noise made her cringe. Everything was different from what she had imagined it would be. She never thought that she would live in a large family with lots of children and people fussing over her. Amelia had expected a quiet life, one where she and Thomas could get to know each other before they began bearing children, and the house became noisy with their little ones. She hadn't expected this. She wandered to the windows and pushed the curtains apart. Dusk was fast approaching, and the glow of the fading sunlight painted an idyllic picture. She could see the outline of the ranch hands. Some were on the field, and others tended to the animals, each of them performing their evening duties with masterful care. The evening breeze was cool against her skin, and if things were different, she would be happy. A pang of sadness coursed through her as she turned away from the windows. A gentle knock on the door announced the arrival of the maid. The maid was a chubby girl with big, brown eyes and a shy smile. She seemed to be about the same age as Amelia. "Hello, miss," she curtsied shyly as she entered the room. "Hello, Betty." Amelia smiled, remembering her name from when she introduced herself earlier. There was a slight surprise on her face. Her eyes lifted and her mouth curled into a warm smile as Amelia called her by her name. "Is everything to your liking?" Yes, the room's quite lovely. Thank you. The hot water's ready, Betty said. She went outside the room and returned with a wash basin and a pitcher of hot water, setting them on the washstand. There are some dresses in the wardroom for you to change into. She pointed to the polished wooden wardrobe on the opposite wall with matching dark wood as the rest of the room. Dinner will be ready in mere minutes, and you can join when you're ready. Amelia nodded. Thank you. With that, Betty slipped out of the room, closing the door with a faint click behind her. Amelia undressed and began to wash. The warm water soothed not only her muscles, but her mind. She pushed her wary thoughts aside for a brief moment and basked in the respite bathing brought her. She held the wardroom slightly ajar when she was done, revealing the neatly hung dresses inside. The dresses were pretty and tasteful. She picked a blue dress with a bow on both sleeves. But as Amelia sat on the bed, worry consumed her once again. Thomas was nowhere to be found. His family was large, and the house was loud. She was separated from her sister. Their grooms seemed to hate each other. Nothing was as she hoped it would be. She folded her arms around herself as she lay on the bed. Exhausted, sad, and anxious about her new life, Amelia closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep. Chapter 4. Thomas smiled as he rode into the ranch. He'd gone into town shortly after Amelia's arrival to receive his new shipment, and he was impressed with what he bought. Thomas dismounted Apollo, a bay with a rich, shining coat of dark hair offset by its honey-brown mane and tail, with the ease of a man who spent more time on the saddle than on his 2 feet. He patted Apollo's neck, rubbing affectionately while his nostrils flared as they adjusted to steady puffs after the long ride to and from the town. The ranch hands gathered around Thomas as he entered the ranch, eagerly uncoupling the harness of the carriage laden with the new shipment from the animal. Good boy, good boy. Thomas caressed Apollo, handing him over to one of the ranch hands, who took him to the stable to rest. All right, boys. Thomas's voice rose above the din of the men's chatter with authority as they huddled around. Our new supplies have arrived. Let's get these tools unloaded and arrange them in their designated places. We've got hoof picks, branding irons, horse tacks, feed bucks, and troughs. Gently carry the construction materials for the barn. I don't want anything broken. Yes, sir. The men's voices rolled in a chorus, and they sprang into action, assigning themselves to different loads and carrying out their tasks with skillful ease. Thomas watched as they worked, overseeing the allocation of the tools and equipment with Hank beside him. They were an efficient crew, and he was proud of how diligent and hard-working they were. Riley, a hoof pick just dropped from the ones you're carrying," Hank called out to one of the ranch hands. Even with his squinted eyes, nothing passed by without Hank's notice. The man missed nothing. Riley nodded, bending to retrieve the hoof pick from the ground and continuing his task. Hank turned to Thomas. Good supplies, sir. We've got more than enough to cater for the growing animals on the ranch. Thomas nodded with a satisfied smile on his face. Yes. His expression turned serious as he continued. The construction of the new barn's got to start first thing tomorrow, Hank. The number of animals on the ranch has multiplied. We've got new calves, kids, and lambs this season. They need more space. I don't want them cramped up. We'll get right on it in the morning. A smile crossed Hank's face as he clapped a hand on Thomas's shoulder. And congratulations on the new bride. I hear she's a real fine lady. Thomas grinned. Thank you, Hank. She's more than I could have hoped for. He turned back to the ranch hands handling the supplies. How are things looking, boys? A scattered response of good and great followed. You've done a fine job, as always, with the shipment. Why don't you head on home and spend some time with your woman? Hank said with a wink. I can take it up from here. Although there was always more work to do on the ranch, the thought of Amelia warmed Thomas's heart. He was eager to see her again. You're right, he said with a broad smile. I'll leave it to you then. I trust you to make sure everything's well tended to. Hank tipped his hat, and they bade each other good night. Thomas made his way home, his heart soaring with excitement as he thought of Amelia. He hoped she was settling in well after the long journey, and he wondered if she liked her room. He had secretly prepared the room for her, without telling anyone else except the maid Betty, whom he sent to the seamstress to sew some new dresses. He knew from Amelia's letters that she loved to read, so he went to the bookstore and bought some books from the writers she had mentioned. He wanted to impress her and make her happy. He'd braced himself for this for many months. At first, the thought of getting married had scared him. What if he found a bride and they didn't like each other? What if she hated life on the ranch and fled from him like Gary O'Reilly's wife? Poor Gary had been devastated for years after his young wife ran away to a city. Thomas had been terrified for many reasons, but eventually his desire for a family of his own prevailed. He couldn't let his fear of change snatch away the chance to be happier. If all went well, Amelia would fit right in with his family. She'd love life here, and they'd be perfectly happy together. His mood was light as he approached the house. He kicked stones with his boots, sending them flying across the compound. From the porch, he could hear his family already gathered for dinner. The aroma of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and gravy wisped its way into his nostrils, and his stomach grumbled in response. He hadn't eaten all day. Sarah had insisted they receive Amelia first when he was about to eat lunch, and his shipment arrived just as they came back home. He opened the front door lightly and made his way to the dining room, their voices growing louder with each step he took. They were asking Amelia questions about her life in New York, and he watched them from a distance. "Where did you say you lived in the city?" Sarah asked, adding another bread roll to Amelia's plate while she hadn't finished eating the one on her plate. "In New York, in an apartment on the Lower East Side." "Was it a lovely place?" Brian, Sarah's son, asked, his eyes twinkling at the mention of the big city. Amelia smiled down at the little boy, tousling his dark hair lightly. "Not quite." Brian made a face, and she laughed. Her laugh was soft and melodic, like a gentle breeze on a summer night. It tugged at Thomas's heartstrings as he watched her. "What work did you do in New York? You have such lovely fair skin, I must say," Martha remarked. "Thank you. I worked in a button factory with my sister Ursula. After the factory shut down, we took on doing laundry to make ends meet." "Laundry?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Who would have known? That must have been a lot of hard work." Amelia's eyes fell to her lap as the questions kept going. Thomas felt bad for her. She must have felt interrogated by his inquisitive family. "Do you knit, Amelia? I enjoy knitting. Perhaps we can even go to the ladies' lunch together tomorrow," Sarah said. Thomas walked to the dining room at that moment. Amelia was about to answer when she looked up and their eyes met. She stood as she saw him. "Thomas," she said softly. He crossed the room in a few strides. "Amelia," he smiled at her and asked, "have you been able to get some rest?" She nodded, her blue eyes gleaming. Thomas wanted to have a moment with her, to see her smile and hear her voice without the interruption of others. Perhaps they could go for a walk together, but a look of exhaustion was still on her face. The journey and his family's chattering must have tired her, he reasoned. He settled into his seat at the head of the table, and Betty served him dinner. As he ate, his gaze kept sliding to Amelia, who glanced away shyly every time their eyes met. He found her shyness very endearing, and it made him smile. "Thomas, why don't you take Amelia for a walk in the garden? It's a lovely evening," Sarah suggested after dinner. "I forgot to show her the garden earlier today, and it's a good opportunity for you two to talk. You've barely had a moment together since Amelia arrived." "Indeed, Sarah, that's a fine idea," Thomas agreed with her, turning to Amelia to ask, "Would you like to go for a walk?" "Yes, I'd like that very much." She smiled even more coyly. Thomas said. Thomas took her small hand in his, leading her out of the house and to the garden. The night had fallen, the sky was dark blue, punctuated by gleaming stars, and the moon shone brightly. The air was cool against his skin as they walked around the garden together. "The garden is stunning. The vibrant colors and the sweet scent," Amelia inhaled as he led her down a path that allowed her to see most of the garden. "Some of the flowers are in full bloom." She gasped. "Blooming at night?" Thomas chuckled. "My mom loved those the most. My mother loved gardening. She started cultivating this garden when I was only a young boy. Tending to the garden was her favorite hobby." "She sounds like a sweet woman." "Oh, she was." He nodded affectionately. "She just had a way with gardening. She had a green thumb. She could make anything grow and bring a broken one back to life. I enjoyed coming to the garden with her as a child. I still tend to the garden now and then every time I miss her. Amelia reached out to touch a bloom, her fingers grazing over the petals with a gentleness that enthralled him. She closed her eyes as she inhaled the sweet scent. It's beautiful, Thomas. She opened her eyes to look at him, smiling sweetly. I can see how much care has gone into it. It's my way of keeping her memory alive. My mother always said that a garden is a reflection of a person's soul. She'd always remind me and Sarah that the care we give to the land is a reflection of the care we give to those we love. I like it, and I like that you kept it going all these years. It shows me that you care for your loved ones without measure. Thomas shrugged, considering her words for a moment. I suppose? Thomas found himself stealing glances at Amelia as they continued their walk around the garden. He was greatly drawn to her quiet composure and the serenity in her expression. He led her to a small bench beneath an oak tree. Thomas. She looked at him gently when they settled on the bench. She looked contemplative, as if unsure of what she was about to say. I wanted to ask if you know where my sister is. I'd love to visit her soon. Thomas glanced away from her, Ethan Garrett crossing his mind as he thought about that afternoon. I'm sorry about my reaction this afternoon, he told Amelia. I'd have loved to get to know Ursula, but she's married to the worst man I know, Ethan Garrett. Amelia's eyes widened as he said this. What do you mean? Thomas told Amelia about their feud because of the stream. Ethan disappeared from Rainbow Falls many years ago and suddenly returned recently with questionable wealth. He said this through gritted teeth and a tone dripping with resentment at the mention of Ethan's name. Now, he wants to steal the stream that has been used by my family for generations. The stream is rightfully mine. Everyone knows the stream has belonged to the Pearson Ranch for decades, he continued. Ethan Garrett and I are not friends, Amelia. He avoided her eyes when he led her back inside the house, putting an abrupt end to their evening. It was better this way, Thomas thought. Now she knew about the kind of man her sister was married to. Ethan Garrett was an enemy hoping to steal what was rightfully his, and he'd see that it didn't happen, come what may. Chapter 5. The dangling bell above the door chimed softly as Amelia and Sarah entered the dressmaker's shop that morning, the smell of fresh fabric and flowers enveloping them. Good morning, Elena, Sarah said, her voice loud with a twinge of excitement carrying over the shop. A woman with locks of auburn hair tied up in a messy bun and a measuring tape peeking from a disarrayed portion of the room flung the curtain apart to reveal her workshop. Her eyes lit up when she saw Sarah, a smile spreading through her face as she waved them inside. Come in. She stood up from the sewing machine and made her way to a more organized space for reception. Her other attendants continued working in the other room, some pining fabrics to mannequins and others sewing with practiced focus. 2 other attendants followed her as she strode to meet them. Sarah, it's lovely to see you as always. Elena smiled warmly. Elena was beautiful. She looked to be in her early 30s and had an elegance to her. Even with her hair tied in a messy bun, she still looked graceful. Sarah smiled back. Lovely to see you too, Elena. Sarah had told Amelia all about Elena on our way here. Her name was Elena Romanova, and she fled from Russia to America after she lost her whole family during a conflict in their town. She settled in Rainbow Falls and soon after married Noah Perkins, one of the few doctors in Rainbow Falls. Elena had grown up in a family of dressmakers, and so she quickly utilized her skills to set up a business that remained unrivaled in Rainbow Falls. Every young woman in town loved her, and their wish was to have their dresses made by Elena Perkins. You'll also have your measurements taken by Elena for your wedding dress, Sarah said. It'll be lovely, you'll see. Elena's the best seamstress we have in town. Amelia was a little excited about the prospect. She knew what she wanted, a simple wedding dress, just like the one her mother had worn when she married her father. It was the only picture she remembered seeing of her late parents together, and she had held on to that image ever since. During her conversations with her sister about what they imagined their wedding dresses to be, She'd always told Ursula she wanted a beautiful but simple flowing wedding dress, just like their ma's. Now she sat in Mrs. Perkins's shop to have her measurements taken for her wedding dress. Her eyes darted around, taking in the busy shop. The shop was a haven of color and textures. Fabrics from soft pastels to vibrant and cooler hues lined up in every color one could think of. A couple of ready-made dresses were hung in a row in the corner of the room. The noise of the mechanical whirl of dresses being made was recurrent. Miss Perkins' eyes flitted over to Amelia, her smile warming as she looked her over. "I did hear that Thomas finally brought in a bride. I assume this is her." "Yes, this is my sister-in-law to be, Amelia. She's a fine lady, isn't she?" "Indeed, she is," Elena said, extending her hands to me. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Amelia." "Likewise," Amelia said, returning her smile. "What kind of wedding dress do you have in mind for our new bride?" the dressmaker asked with a wink to Sarah. "Yes, I'd like a long, simple—" Amelia began to say it with a shy smile on her face, but she was cut off by Sarah. "I, of course, have something in mind," Sarah said, leaning against the chair as she did. "After all, it's my brother's wedding. It should be grand." One of the attendants handed Alina a notepad on which she began to draw. "Something grand. Would you like intricate embroidery on the dress? Perhaps on the veil and the sweeping train of the dress?" Sarah nodded excitedly, beaming like she was the bride-to-be. "A fine idea. Cassidy, I'd like for you to use the most expensive and exquisite lace fabric you have. The train of the dress has to be long and sparkly, and we mustn't forget the pearls. Oh, I have a vision in my mind. It's clear as day." Amelia felt discarded while Sarah continued to tell Alina about how she'd like the dress to be without even asking for her opinion. Amelia was the one who would wear it. Surely her opinion should be consulted first. But the women kept talking, completely ignoring her. She couldn't hide the glower on her face as she looked at Sarah in frustration. She was visibly upset, her brows knitted in a frown, and her nails digging into her hands while Sarah went on. Her head was beginning to ache too. The dressmaker's shop suddenly felt constricting and uncomfortable. "I'm feeling a slight headache. Can I go out to get some fresh air?" Amelia asked Sarah, her lips in a tight line. Sarah threw her a glance from where she was sitting. Looking over Elena's sketch for the wedding dress, she waved her hand dismissively. "All right, but don't stray too far. Elena and I are almost done, and she'd need to take your measurements." Amelia cringed. Sarah was treating her like she was one of her children. She made her way outside, thinking about how long she could bear Sarah's behavior. Even now, it looked like she would control all their wedding preparations without seeking Amelia's thoughts. Amelia didn't like the idea at all. She didn't want a big wedding. Everything felt so wrong. Tears stung her eyes as the crisp air outside the shop enveloped her, but it didn't do much to put her wary mind to rest, even momentarily. The wedding dress event had made her upset and more frustrated with Sarah, but she didn't know what to do about it. "Are you okay, miss?" a gentle voice asked her from behind. Amelia turned to meet a young woman holding a child with her other hand. She had kind blue eyes and curly brown hair. Her daughter was a spitting image of her. The woman looked warm and friendly, and the look of concern on her face almost made Amelia start to cry. With a vigorous shake of her head and fighting back tears that pricked her eyes, Amelia replied, "No, I'm not. I'm not fine at all." The woman led her to a bench close by, and they sat down together. "You just moved to town, didn't you?" Amelia's eyes widened. "I just did. Is it that obvious?" The woman smiled. "No, but when a woman looks like she's about to cry outside of Elena's shop, they're usually mail-order brides new to town and overwhelmed by the changes." "Oh," Amelia sniffled. "I was a mail-order bride myself." The woman continued with a smile. "My name is Faith, and this is my daughter, Cheryl." Amelia's eyes shone with curiosity as she looked at her. There were so many questions running through her mind that she wanted to ask Faith. How did a mail-order bride adjust to life in a new town? Did she love her husband? Did she also have an overbearing sister-in-law? Are you happy? The question rolled off Amelia's tongue before she could stop herself. It was the foremost question on her mind. Faith smiled more broadly, patting her daughter's hair before answering. "I am. I'm very happy and content." Moving to Rainbow Falls turned out to be the best decision of my life. Although it wasn't an easy journey to get to this state of happiness, she sighed. It was a rather tough journey, so I understand and empathize with you. I'm just so scared. Amelia covered her face with her hand, feeling thoroughly overwhelmed. I'm scared that I'll be unhappy here. So far, everything's not as I thought it'd be, and the fear it strikes in my mind is crippling. I thought Rainbow Falls would be my happy ending. I wanted this place to give me everything I wanted. Faith took Amelia's hand in hers. It's okay to be scared. I was too. Everything was going awry when I came here. My brother's death led me to be a mail-order bride, and then when I came to Rainbow Falls, all I wanted was to escape my reality and live a new life, but lots of twists and turns happened. I was scared and alone in a new town with a whole different reality than I'd expected. But now, look at me. Amelia looked up at her, the bright smile on her face and the doting love in her eyes as she looked at her daughter. She looked happy, content, and well cared for. I've never been happier in my life. I adjusted to the new life, opened my heart to love, and found my happiness. I got myself a loving husband and my precious Cheryl. And I have a clinic too. You're a doctor? Faith nodded. Yes, and don't think it was easy to get there. It wasn't. But I got here anyway. I found my happy place. You will too. Faith's words comforted Amelia, and she thanked Faith for her kindness. Just as she did, a wagon arrived. That's my husband, Dennis, Faith whispered, her eyes shining with affection. Goodbye, Amelia. I wish you well, and I hope you find happiness in your journey. Goodbye, Faith, she said with a smile. I hope so too. Thank you for your kind words. Amelia kneeled to hug Cheryl. It's so good to meet you too, Cheryl. Cheryl smiled shyly, hiding behind her mother's dress. Amelia watched as Faith walked to meet Dennis, with Cheryl running ahead, whom he caught and threw up lightly. She squealed excitedly. He carried her in one arm and wrapped his other arm around Faith's waist, pressing a kiss to her forehead. The scene warmed Amelia's heart, and she watched as the wagon rolled away. The warmth was soon replaced with a dull ache in her heart. Would she and Thomas ever look at each other that way? There had been some friction between them since that night when Thomas told her about Ethan. He was barely at home, and the few times he was, he didn't ask to see her outside of mealtimes. He greeted her so politely and stiffly that Amelia was worried he didn't like her. Did all mail-order marriages end in happiness? And would she ever be that lucky? Will you sit down before I sit you down myself, Penelope Mathers? Sarah's voice was curt as she addressed her daughter firmly at lunch. But Brian's playing too. You didn't yell at him to sit down. You always yell at me. Only Penelope, Penelope grumbled while taking her seat. Brian, sit down too. Sarah repeated the command to him, as if to balance the chiding between the two children. Brian giggled as he took his seat. Now, Brian, don't you stick your tongue out at Penelope, Uncle Joe cautioned, shaking his finger at Brian. I don't want you two to fight. Okay, Uncle, Brian nodded. But when Uncle Joe turned back to his food, he turned to Penelope and stuck his tongue out again. Ma! Penelope's voice was shrill, her eyes brimming with tears. Brian stuck his tongue out at me again. He did it again. The bickering was one that happened every time the family was gathered together. It made Amelia dread mealtimes because everyone kept talking over one another, and conversations flowed endlessly. They all expected her to join in this mealtime chatter, but Amelia had never been one to talk. She kept to herself during these times, eating her food as quickly as possible so she could retreat to the quiet confines of her room. Amelia's headache was persistent earlier that morning, and it only worsened with the noise at lunch. When she was done eating, Amelia excused herself and left for her room. As she climbed up the stairs leading up, she overheard Uncle Joe talking to Sarah and his wife Martha about the feud. Her steps slowed, and she listened closely. It all started with my brother and Ethan's father. It's been running for so many decades now, but Thomas ain't got no part in it. I see why he's livid that Ethan's now trying to lay claim on the stream. He's trying to reignite a feud that began with their fathers. Stop talking about it, Uncle, Sarah said. It's not for children's ears. But that was enough for Amelia. She let out a shaky breath. Ethan was Thomas's rival, not a criminal. The other night, Thomas's tone had suggested Ethan was a criminal, and she'd been worried for her sister. Now it was clear that the bitter tone was only because of Thomas's hatred for him. Amelia was about to open the door to her room when Betty appeared. "Miss, Howard's outside, waiting for you." She looked around before she leaned closer, her tone dropping to a whisper. "Says he's got a letter for you from your sister." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. A letter from Ursula. "Take me to him." Betty took her to Howard, one of Ethan's ranch hands, who gave her the letter from Ursula. She thanked him and hurriedly went up to her room to read the letter. Her heart raced as she read the letter. Ursula had invited her to visit. She beamed when she was done reading, and her headache seeped away, giving way to a light happiness. Amelia immediately got on her feet to clean up, excited to finally see her sister again. Chapter 6. Thomas loaded his purchase onto the carriage. Joel Silvers had arrived from his travels, and Thomas was finally able to purchase the hay they were running out of on the ranch and other feed for the animals, including corn and oats. He was glad to be able to get them. He had assured Hank the ranch wouldn't run out of feed before they restocked. Now, he could purchase enough to keep the animals well fed through the next several months. "Ain't that Thomas Pearson I see already here to snap up all the feed for his ranch?" Zeke, a fellow rancher, said with a grin as he reached the barn door. Thomas laughed as he shook Zeke's hand with a firm grip. "Well, if it ain't the same thing you're here for." Zeke's response was followed by a deep, rumbling chuckle. "Reckon we're both thinking ahead for the harsher months then." The door of the house creaked open, and Joel stepped out. His eyes twinkled with familiarity as he waved them over. "Hey, Thomas and Zeke, my good men, why don't you come on inside and take a load off?" His voice boomed with good humor. "I have some cold beer in the house." "Sounds like a mighty fine idea," Zeke said. Thomas nodded. "Indeed." A drink and a bit of shade after the ride from his ranch to Joel's barn sounded good. A sheen of sweat had already gathered on his forehead from the day's heat, and he wiped it off with the sleeve of his shirt as they followed the wealthy farmer inside his home. The cool air inside the house was a welcome relief, and Thomas glanced around, taking in the cozy atmosphere. The living room was large and comfortable, with a rustic stone fireplace and armchairs that looked newly built around the room. The shelves were lined with trinkets from Joel's travels, books, and family photographs. "Have a seat." Joel motioned for him and Zeke to sit on a large cushion where a pitcher of beer and some cups lay before them on a sturdy wooden table. "I see you both came to make a head start on purchases before the rush begins tomorrow." Joel poured the beer into the cups. He looked up from the pitcher, making a face at both men. "Looks like we've only got enough for 2 people, one for me and one for you both. What will you two do?" Thomas and Zeke exchanged glances, and with a shrug, they announced together, "We'll share." Joel let out a hearty laugh. "I'm only fooling with you. There's enough to go round." He poured the last cup before handing the cups to them. "Don't mind my fooling," Thomas and Zeke chuckled along with him. "Oh, well then," Thomas said, raising his cup in a toast. "To good neighbors and good business." "And too many fine beers," Zeke added. They all laughed, drinking with relish. "Reckon the weather's been kind to us this month," Thomas said, glancing out at the bright afternoon sky. "My pastures are still green, and the cattle have been fattening up nicely." "Indeed, we might even get a second cutting of hay if this keeps up," Joel agreed, nodding. "It's been a great season for farm crops. The field has yielded more than I expected. I've got no complaints, only happiness." "Aye, the Lord's been good to us this season. Maybe we're being replenished from last year's drought." Joel clicked his tongue at Zeke's mention of the drought. "A terrible season, that one. I agree, we're being replenished. How's your stock holding up anyway, Zeke?" Zeke grinned. "Very well. Got a new bull last spring, and he's sired a fine bunch of calves already. Thomas is the one with mares bursting out of his ranch. Each time I drop by his ranch, the animals seem to have increased in folds." Thomas laughed proudly, "Which is why we started the construction for the new barn." "Prosody, I tell you, there's something in Joel's feed for my livestock. It's why I keep coming back." The men laughed. "Just be careful with the fence," Zeke warned him. I keep rebuilding mine so the cattle won't break out of it during grazing, but it stays just until the next storm comes to knock it right off. Thomas shook his head, sympathizing with him. That's the way of it, unfortunately. A rancher's work is never done. The conversation flowed easily as they continued talking about the constant challenges of managing their ranches and farms, as well as the crops in season. It was all good-natured as they shared tips they knew, the kind that came from men who share similar struggles and understood the quiet pride that lay in honest, hard work. It wasn't long before the chatter shifted to personal matters. Before I forget, Zeke turned to Thomas, a knowing smile playing on his lips. I hear you got yourself a new bride. Congratulations are in order, I reckon. Thomas shifted in his seat, feeling the weight of their gazes. Well, thanks, Zeke, but we ain't married just yet. Joel and Zeke exchanged glances before turning to him with raised eyebrows, their stares full of curiosity. Oh, well, when might that be happening then? Zeke asked. Make sure to invite us if you're planning on throwing a big wedding, Joel said with a chuckle. Thomas pursed his lips, his tone careful as if weighing each word. Truth be told, I don't rightly know yet. It's complicated. Zeke frowned, leaning forward. Complicated? That sounds troubling, Thomas. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you're having doubts about getting married. Thomas shrugged. Who's to say I'm not? It's just... His words trailed off, the weight of his admission bearing heavily on his shoulders. How do you marry someone you only know about through letters? Zeke voiced his unspoken questions, his expression softening. How do you adjust your life for a woman you barely know anything about? How do you even know if your marriage will be peaceful? What if you don't like her and she doesn't like you? Thomas looked at Zeke, and his words struck the same chord of questions that had been bothering him about getting married. A change in the routineness of his life bothered him, and he wasn't sure he was willing to accept such a change in his life until he was sure. If all was perfect, they'd be able to spend the rest of their lives together in love, peace, and harmony. For now, he wasn't so sure, and he didn't want to rush into marrying Amelia for fear of regretting his action. How do I know she's the one? Thomas shook his head. It's complicated because there's not a clear-cut answer for it, and I'm fully aware. Yet, it worries me to no end. Marriage is a lifelong vow. Zeke clapped a hand on Thomas's shoulder. I had the same question when I sent for my bride. Thought it was foolish to marry a woman I didn't know much about. I was particularly scared of marrying a stranger with a past I couldn't accept. So many things could go wrong, right? He continued quietly. Took me a good while to come around to the idea of a mail-order bride. Thomas nodded, grateful to have found someone else who understood his plight. Yet, you went through with it. Indeed, I did. Zeke smiled wistfully as he called the past, his eyes crinkling at the corners. And I'm glad I took the chance. Turns out we're more alike than I could have ever imagined. She's strong in so many ways, and her strength has only made me stronger. I have a wonderful family because I took a chance. If there are other lifetimes, I'd take the chance again and again. Thomas sighed, staring into the cup of beer in his hands as he listened to Zeke's words. Zeke's voice was full of affection as he talked about his family. I reckon I wouldn't even be the man I am today if it weren't for her. Sometimes you're not even aware of how much you need something until you get that thing. I do know I need a wife. Thomas shook his head as he thought about Sarah's persistent whining about his bachelor status. Everyone reminds me of it, especially my beloved sister, Sarah. And I see all my friends like you, seeming happy in their marriages. It makes me think maybe getting married won't be too bad. Zeke nodded with a smile. It's a lovely thing with the right woman, I'll tell you that. Joel cleared his throat. He took a long sip of his beer before saying, Thomas, it's understandable to have doubts. Doubts are normal. If you weren't a little doubtful, then I'd reckon something ain't right, he continued. But you have to know that life's full of what-ifs. You can't know every detail of a person's past, just like she can't know yours in full. We only know what we're told. This is where you both grow together, learn to trust each other more freely, and build something worth holding on to. Letters may tell you a part of the story, but they aren't the whole thing. The rest, well, that comes with time. Thomas mulled over their words on his way home. They had bid each other goodbye as Riva, Joel's wife, arrived from the market. Joel put an end to their conversation after that, eager to focus his attention on his wife. He saw the way Joel's eyes lit up with love as his wife arrived. It painted a picture of a life he hadn't dared to dream of. The knowledge gained from Zeke and Joel's lived experiences made him want to desperately hold on to their reassurances. It was true that he had his head buried in the uncertainties, but it was for good reason. He sighed, knowing he still had his fears and doubts. Perhaps those men were only lucky to find love. He knew very well that not everyone could be that lucky. His parents certainly weren't. Thomas passed by a flower shop and thought it'd be nice if he got some flowers for Amelia. He gathered a lovely bouquet and continued home. When Thomas finally arrived home, his first sight was Amelia. He sucked in a breath as he stared at her. She looked beautiful in her yellow dress, the setting sun bestowing its soft glow upon her with hues of amber and gold. She was sitting on the porch, reading a book in her hands. A stray strand of brunette hair fell over her cheeks, and he felt an urge to reach out and brush it away. Amelia was a truly breathtaking young lady. She looked up as though she sensed that she was being watched, and their eyes met. Her lips parted as she saw him, and her lips curled into a small, tentative smile. He'd kept her at arm's length these last few days after their conversation about her sister and Ethan, and he felt bad about that. She did nothing wrong, and she deserved better than to be treated like that. He was going to make things right between them. Amelia. Thomas breathed her name softly when he reached her. She looked up at him with gentle eyes. "Thomas, you're back." "I am." He handed her the flowers. "I got these for you on my way." "How sweet of you." Her smile reached her eyes. She closed her eyes to take in the sweet scent of the flowers. "I love them. Thank you, Thomas." "I'm glad you do. Would you like to go for a walk with me?" Amelia nodded, a sweet smile on her lips. Chapter 7. A comfortable silence reigned as Amelia and Thomas walked together. A soft smile rested on Amelia's face as she noticed this. It felt like they were two dancers moving in perfect sync. "The barn's almost ready for new animals," he said as they passed by the new barn being constructed. "Indeed, Buck and the ranch hands did their thing. Good men," he said with a proud smile, glancing at the barn. "Come now, I'll show you the stream where the animals have their fill." The faint scent of fallen leaves enveloped the air, a fragrant reminder that autumn was slowly making its way to Rainbow Falls. It filled Amelia with a rush. She loved autumn. The sound of leaves crunching beneath their shoes as they made their way to the stream filled the silence. Amelia glanced at Thomas. His hands were tucked into the pockets of his trousers, his gaze fixed ahead. Her heart fluttered with the same familiar feeling that always seemed to accompany these rare moments alone with Thomas. When they reached the stream, Thomas stopped at the edge of the water. Amelia stepped closer to the flowing stream. The waters glimmered as they ran over the smooth stones, the afternoon sun sending beautiful streaks across it. Thomas looked across the sprawling land with a somber look on his face, and when he spoke, his voice was deep and steady. "This stream reminds me of the time I spent with my father. He moved to Rainbow Falls with nothing. All he had was his young wife and a strong will to create a better life for his family. He was a great man, an ambitious hard worker." He swept his hand over the fields. "The land you see now was wild. But my father, ambitious as he was optimistic, saw not what it was, but what it could be. He built all of this. It's his legacy." Amelia's gaze followed his, trying to imagine what it was like before the grand house and beautiful ranch, the rough, uncultivated land that must have greeted his father upon arrival. The thought of a man determined to make something of himself and create a better life for his family stirred something deep within her. She recognized the same determination in Thomas. "Since I was a child, he'd always remind me that this is my legacy as well, the Pearson legacy. I have a responsibility to make this better for myself, for my family, and for my generation." He smiled when he glanced at Amelia. "Luckily, I love being a rancher as well." Amelia could see the passion brimming in his eyes as he spoke and the sense of responsibility and pride he felt. It made Thomas even more endearing to her. It was on the tip of her tongue to ask, to make sense of the feud with Ethan's father and the whispers she had heard but never fully understood. Yet her palms became sleek with sweat as she thought of asking. It made her nervous, scared that she would push him further away. The way his jaw tightened whenever the subject came up, and the anger in his eyes always made her pause. His silence the past week had been a chasm between them, one Amelia couldn't cross and one she longed to breach, but she wasn't sure how. They didn't speak much. Thomas was always busy with work, and when he came home, his responses to her were brief and polite. He appeared unwilling to look at her longer than a few seconds, unwilling to hold a conversation with her. And then there was the matter of his family, who filled the house with loud and boisterous chatter at every turn, making it harder to have a moment with her husband-to-be. Amelia's brow knitted to a frown at the impossible situation this was. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other as she stared at the stream like it held an abundance of courage she needed. A sudden rustling of leaves nearby drew her sharply from her reverie, making her alert to her environment. It was followed by a swift movement that made her heart almost leap out of her body. It was a wild rabbit making its way underbrush, and disturbed by their presence, the rabbit darted across them speedily as it ran for safer thickets. Amelia screamed as she saw it, leaping towards Thomas in sudden fright. Thomas wrapped his arms around her, providing her with protection as he held her against his solid chest. For a moment, everything else seemed to fade away, her erratic heartbeat finding its rhythm with the steady heartbeat of Thomas. "Easy, Amelia," Thomas whispered, his voice a low caress that sent shivers coursing down her spine. "It's only a rabbit." Amelia looked up and their eyes locked. There was something in his gaze that she hadn't noticed before, something new, something gentle, something warm, that belied his usual distant demeanor. There was an intensity in his gaze that made her pulse quicken, rooting her firmly to the spot, and for a fleeting moment, Amelia wondered if he might kiss her. But just as she thought this, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the spell between them. Thomas gently released her, giving her a small smile. Amelia was the first to see the intruder, and her heart sank as Ethan came into view. Thomas turned in her direction to see who it was, and immediately his posture stiffened. The air between the two men crackled with tension. There was a stark change in Thomas's demeanor. His silver eyes darkened, his jaw tightened, his hands clenched to fists at his side, and there was an involuntary twitch in his eyebrows. With a glance at Thomas, Amelia knew she had to excuse them. "I'll leave you two to talk." Amelia didn't go far away. She hid behind some trees, a good spot far enough to give them some space, but still within earshot so she could finally get some answers. "What are you doing here, Thomas?" she heard Ethan say. "Just making sure you're not trying to steal the stream, Garrett. It's not yours." "Steal? That's rich coming from a Pearson. We both know the stream belongs to my family. It's been that way since our fathers split the land." Amelia's ears perked up. Thomas and Ethan's fathers had shared the land. They were friends? She found that bit of information surprising, especially with the recent developments. So, what caused the rift between them? The question stormed her mind. She waited with bated breath, hoping for answers. "Your father cheated mine out of that land. Jesse Pearson ruined my father and took advantage of him. I won't let history repeat itself." Ethan sounded angry now. "Your father was weak. He couldn't handle the competition. Don't blame my father for that. Isn't it time you moved on? You built your ranch. What more do you want?" "What?" Amelia took a step back. Thomas's father cheated Ethan's father out of the land. That was what caused the rift between them. Amelia's heart hurt for Ethan and his father. That must have been so hard to live with. The two men's voices continued to rise in anger, and they started threatening to fight each other if it came to that. As they yelled, her hopes of having the dream she shared with her sister started slipping away even further. Amelia's heart raced. She could stand there and watch them fighting with her heart in her mouth, condemning herself to a horrid fate, sneaking out to see her sister, or worse, being unable to. Or she could swallow her trepidation and act. "Enough!" she shouted, with a sudden wave of courage that surprised her as much as the men, judging from the looks on their faces. She stepped between them. Going on like this isn't solving anything. You two have been bickering like little children for so long. Isn't it tiring? Thomas started to speak, but Amelia silenced him with a glare. She didn't know where the confidence came from, but it surged through her strongly, and though her hands were shaking, she continued. She had to do this, not just for herself, but for her sister, for their shared hopes and dreams. She sucked in a breath to calm herself, then turned to Ethan with a smile. He blinked. I want to invite you to our wedding. Your presence is important to me and Ursula. After a moment, Ethan spoke. I appreciate the invitation, but I won't be there. Amelia's face fell. She knew it would be difficult for him to agree to come, but his response was still disappointing. I hope you'll reconsider. For Ursula's sake, I'll come by to ask you once more. Amelia took Thomas's hands in hers. Let's go, Tom. Thomas and Ethan exchanged a cold glare before he turned away with Amelia. The walk back home was silent. Thomas's hands were jammed deep into his pockets, his lips forming a thin line. He was stiff with tension. Amelia could feel the words building inside her, desperate to spill out and understand the situation with Ursula's husband more clearly. She cleared her throat and pushed her hair away from her face. Thomas, what happened between yours and Ethan's father? He didn't answer for a while. He continued walking, kicking up dust motes in his wake and wallowing in his silent anger. I know you heard it all, Amelia. He exhaled loudly. My father tried to make peace with Ethan's father to no avail. He tried to bury the hatchet between them and put all that bad blood behind them before he died. His voice was tight with emotion when he turned to her. My father tried his best, but Ethan's father wasn't having it. It wasn't his fault, and it surely isn't mine. Ethan's not letting go of his grudges, carrying them like a cross to bear, and he's now treating me like the villain. I won't have it. Amelia held her breath, her mind racing as she pieced the new information with the fragments of the story she heard earlier. It confused her immensely. If Jesse Pearson did try to make amends with Ethan's father, why did the rift continue? What happened? When she arrived home, she immediately got to writing a letter to Ursula, telling her about the discovery she had made about the feud. Amelia handed the letter to Betty to give to the ranch hand, Howard, who brought Ursula's letter to her. Amelia's heart thumped slightly with anticipation as she prepared to go to the diner after. On her way, she met two young women who introduced themselves as Tiffany and Agnes. They had a bright smile as they chatted with her, but she was in a hurry and didn't speak with them for long. Amelia finally reached the diner, and as she waited for Ursula to arrive, she could feel several curious eyes on her. She sat rigidly in her seat, her eyes fixated on the glass of water on the table, tapping her feet nervously against the floor as she counted the seconds silently until Ursula arrived. The door swung open and she looked up, her eyes latched on Ursula, and her face lit up with a smile. Ursula squeezed her hand as she slid into the chair opposite her. It's so good to see you. I came over as soon as I got your letter. The two sisters immediately got to exchanging the information they had and talked about making amends. I couldn't come to meet you. Ethan might not be pleased to see me, Amelia said, her gaze falling. Things have gotten worse. Ursula drew a sharp breath. She leaned in, lowering her voice. I understand why now. 2 nights ago, Ethan and I nearly got into an argument about your suggestion. Later, he came to my room to apologize. He told me about how Thomas's father cheated his father when he was still young. They never reconciled. Now Thomas is trying to do the same thing. Amelia frowned. Thomas said something different. Ursula drew back, raising a brow. What did he say? Thomas did mention something about Jesse, his father, Amelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. He said Jesse tried to make amends with Ethan's father, Ben. Ursula's eyes widened. Make amends? Ethan never mentioned anything like that. He's always painted Jesse as the villain. Amelia nodded. That's what Thomas said. Maybe there's something Ethan doesn't know or doesn't want to accept. I don't think Thomas is lying. If Jesse really did try to make amends, there might be evidence of it somewhere. Maybe letters or documents. Maybe Ben or Jesse had a diary. Ursula frowned, staring into space. You're right. I'll look around the house. There might be something that could change Ethan's mind. I'll do the same. Their order of cornbread arrived, and as they were eating, Amelia told her sister about everything that was happening with Sarah, her overbearing nature, and how overwhelming Thomas's family was for her. Amelia, this might not be what you want to hear, but you have to stand up for yourself against Sarah, especially since you're about to be Thomas's wife. You'll soon be the lady of the household. You'll have responsibilities, and one of those is to take up space. Run your household the way you deem fit, with your husband, not according to the whims of your sister-in-law. Ursula placed a finger under Amelia's chin, forcing her to meet her gaze. I know you don't like conflict and you prefer to let peace reign, but if things keep going on like this, who knows? Sarah might be the one to dictate everything that happens in your marriage, including how to raise your children. Is that the future you want? Amelia frowned, but she knew deep down that the thought wasn't far-fetched at this rate. Still, a pit formed in her stomach at the thought of standing up to Sarah. After all, she was Thomas's only sibling, and this might cause another trouble between them, but she had to do something about her. And very soon, if she wanted to secure her place in the household. Chapter 8. The next evening, Thomas saddled up Apollo to ride into town with a single purpose: to prevent Ethan from fencing the stream into his ranch. His thoughts had been unsettled since his encounter with Ethan the previous afternoon, and he knew he had to act quickly if he wanted to retain possession of the stream. It angered Thomas that Ethan was adamant about claiming the stream, but it also fueled his determination to keep the stream within his ranch. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves, typical of autumn. The gentle swaying of trees losing their leaves, the sound of the horse hooves crushing the withering grass that flanked the road, and the distant calling of birds were his only companions. The ride into town was lonely and full of quiet introspection. One thing Thomas was certain of was that he couldn't let Ethan take away the stream from him, for his sense of responsibility towards the ranch, for his pride, and for his family's legacy. He wouldn't allow Ethan to get the upper hand out of a grudge he bore against his family. His father had worked relentlessly to make the ranch one of the most distinguished in Rainbow Falls, and Ethan wasn't about to destroy that prestige. Thomas knew what he had to do. He was going to meet Samuel Hart, the best lawyer in town. Samuel would advise him on the legal measures he could take to protect what was his. His hands tightened on the reins around Apollo, urging him to go faster, anticipation coursing through his veins as he thought about his meeting with Samuel. It was a way forward. The town was alive with people making their last purchases before night settled, traders calling out to the townspeople passing by, and the sounds of wagons rumbling down the road. The aroma of fresh bread being made from Old Pat's bakery wafted into his nostrils, mingling with the faint smell of horses jogging around, and leather from John's shoemaker shop. Samuel's office came into view, and Thomas dismounted Apollo, tying the large horse to a post at the front of the lawyer's office. He walked to the front door, excited to discuss his situation with him. He knocked on the door, but no response came. "Samuel Hart," he called as he knocked. "Are you in there?" The lock dangled. He hadn't noticed it before. Samuel Hart wasn't in office. Thomas's heart fell, his hands on his hips as he considered what to do next. Then a place struck his mind at that moment: the tavern. Samuel would be there. He wasn't known for keeping strict office hours anyway. More often than not, once the sun was making its way down to the west, he was found where ale flowed freely and the conversation was loud and endless. Thomas made his way to the old tavern in town. It was a place he usually avoided except for absolutely necessary reasons. The building was weathered by years of sun and rain, sagging with age, and the sign above the door was bent, creaking further and threatening to fall, but never doing so with each swing of the door. Thomas pushed through the door, the smell of sweat, tobacco, and stale ale hitting him as he stepped in. The chatter of men drinking and talking loudly over each other, the clinking of mugs, and the shuffle of cards surrounded him while his eyes darted around looking for Samuel. At the far end of the room, he spotted Samuel. The lawyer was hunched over the table, cuddling a glass of ale in his hands and a plate of roast meat laid on his table, half eaten, with a sly smile on his face as he watched a game of faro being played on the table next to his. His suit was rumpled, and a thin streak of ale stained his worn shirt and beard. He pushed his spectacles over his broken nose as he watched the game. Thomas made his way over to him. Samuel Hart might not look as distinguished as other lawyers, but he had a shrewd reputation, and Thomas knew he was the man he needed. "Samuel Hart," Thomas greeted, tipping his hat to the shrewd lawyer. "I've been looking for you." Samuel's thin eyes darted up, his lips curving into a smile as recognition settled on his face. "Look, it's the son of the soil himself, Thomas Pearson." Thomas smiled as they shook hands. The bartender came over to take his order. "A round of drinks for the table on me, and I'll settle the payment for Mr. Hart's drinks so far." A far too kind gesture," Samuel said, pushing his glasses further back on his nose and peering at Thomas intently. "Tell me, what brings you to this fine establishment today? I'd say you're not the kind of man who often visits our dear old tavern." Thomas leaned in closer to the table, his voice steady when he spoke. "I need to talk to you about the stream on my father's land, which Ethan Garrett's laying claim to. I'm certain you've heard about it. Gossip spreads rather quickly in our town. I need a lawyer to help me secure the stream legally." For a while, Samuel said nothing. He took a long sip of his ale, belched when he was done, and rubbed his beard with a dirty sleeve. He then cleared his throat, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Thomas, and his tone dismissive when he spoke. The stream dispute. I'd like to help you, Thomas, but I'm afraid you're a little too late. Ethan's already been to my office. We've spoken about it, and I've already been hired on his behalf. I'm his lawyer on his matter, and thus my hands are tired. I can't help you." With that, he turned back to the men playing faro, his stance putting the conversation to an end. The waiter brought the drinks Thomas already paid for. He threw Thomas a sly smile, raising a glass. "Thanks for the drinks, Thomas." Thomas balled his hands into fists, grinding his teeth as the implication of Samuel's words registered. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor and falling with the sudden movement as he stormed out of the tavern. The door of the tavern slammed with a jam, but he didn't turn back. His hands clenched tightly to the reins, and his heart raced while he mounted Apollo and rode back home. Ethan beat him to hiring Samuel Hart. He couldn't stand the thought. This couldn't be the end of it for him. He didn't know what his next move was, but he knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. Apollo, as if sensing his despair, rode faster home, his hooves sending a flurry of dried leaves skittering across the road. The fight for the stream had just gotten a lot more difficult, but Thomas knew he couldn't give up. When he returned home, Amelia was waiting just outside the porch for him. She was pacing, her lips pressed firmly together. It was clear that something was bothering her, but he wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone. The weight of what happened at the tavern rested heavily on his shoulders. "Thomas." She walked over to meet him as he rode inside the compound. A ranch hand ran over to receive Apollo from him. "I must speak to you about something if you have some time." He wanted nothing more than to retire to his bedroom to ponder on his next course of action, but the urgency in Amelia's words made him stop to listen to her. "I'm all ears." "Thomas, I wanted to know if Sarah would keep living with us after we got married." The question had such an obvious answer. Of course, Sarah would. She was his only sibling, and she had been through so much in life. He would protect her as best as he could. "Sarah and I have always been close, and the deaths of our parents and her husband have only made us closer. She's my only sister, of course, she would." Amelia fidgeted with her hands, straightening the already straightened skirt, her eyes locking onto his with resolve. "I just reasoned that it'd be best if we got to know each other and built our lives together as a family, Thomas, without so much noise." A moment passed before her words sank in. "Noise?" Thomas raised a brow. "Noise? You think my family's noisy? You don't like my family, do you? Is this why you don't talk much during mealtimes?" Amelia shook her head. "Thomas, I already told you before I arrived that I don't do well in loud places. I mostly keep to myself, and—" Thomas cut her off before she finished speaking. "Tell me what you expected by coming to the West, Amelia. If life here's too noisy for you, If my family burdens you tremendously with their unbearable noise, perhaps you should have stayed in the city." Amelia's mouth fell open. She didn't say a word. Her eyes remained glued to the ground. Thomas's heart sank when he turned to her and saw the tears. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. He had taken his anger at being bested by Ethan on her. He should have gone to his room to cool down before listening to her. "Amelia," Thomas said softly, his hands hovering over her shoulders. He was unsure whether he could touch her when he was the cause of her pain. "Amelia, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." Her sobbing increased, and he relented and put an arm around her shoulders, comforting her and apologizing until the tears stopped. "I'm truly sorry, Amelia. I was only taking my anger out on you, which is improper. Something happened today, but it doesn't excuse my behavior. I'm so sorry." She sniffled, looking up at him with teary eyes. "What happened?" He sat on a bench outside the house, and he told her about his visit to Samuel Hart. "Why can't you share the stream with him? Or do as your father did and extend an olive branch?" Thomas shook his head vehemently. Amelia was naive. "I can't do that, Amelia. It'll appear as an admission of guilt, making me and my father look like the wrong people. I refuse to do that. I'm not the villain he desperately wants to make me out to be." Amelia sighed softly beside him. "Don't worry, I'll handle this, and I won't take out my anger on you anymore. I'm sorry for doing that." Thomas took her face in his hands, then wrapped his arms around her once again. Amelia rested her head on his chest. As he held her in his arms, Thomas realized that he had grown even more fond of her. Everything about Amelia drew him to her. She was so soft and gentle, like a delicate flower in the middle of a prairie. He couldn't let his animosity towards Ethan keep hurting Amelia. He had to find a way to get the whole mess under control so that he could be free to start a wonderful life with his bride. In You. Chapter 9. Excitement bubbled through Amelia when she climbed out of bed that morning. The room was still cloaked in the soft hues of early morning as she donned a simple dress from the few ones she brought with her from New York. The fire in the hearth across her room had long burned out, leaving behind the faintest trail of warmth and the smell of firewood lingering in the air. Her heart pulsed strongly with determination as she made her way to the kitchen. Today was the day she began to make her mark in her husband-to-be's household. She needed to follow Ursula's words. Her sister's words at the diner rang faintly in the back of her mind now, spurring her forward. She intended to prepare a meal for the family, offering a piece of her past to the family she was now a part of. The recipe she had in mind was one her mother had taught her and Ursula. Her mother regularly prepared the meal during autumn mornings like this. The kitchen was dim. The only light was the faint glow of embers coming from the stove. Helen, the cook, was already there, stoking the fires to prepare for breakfast. There was a slight surprise on her face when she glanced up to see Amelia. A warm smile replaced the surprise on Helen's face. "Up early, Miss Amelia?" Amelia returned her warm smile. She liked the older woman. She seemed kind and warm, and she always asked Amelia what she'd prefer to eat if she noticed that Amelia wasn't eating well during mealtimes. Helen's generous spirit reminded Amelia of her mother sometimes. "Yes, I am. Good morning, Helen." "Good morning to you." She peered at her. "You need something, miss. Maybe I can help." "Yes, Helen. I'd like for us to prepare today's meal together, if you don't mind." "It's a beloved recipe that my mother passed to me and my sister." Helen smiled broadly. "Of course, that sounds hearty, and the kitchen's yours." Her voice boomed with the cadence of a life well spent in service. "What do you need, so I can prepare them?" Bolstered by Helen's warm response, Amelia began to list the ingredients for the meal. "Thank you, Helen. I'd like some regular baking ingredients. Flour, eggs, butter, and a pinch of nutmeg. Oh, and of course, some of that nice bacon you used for last night's dinner." Helen quickly gathered the ingredients, and then they both got to work. The kitchen slowly filled with the sounds of cooking preparation, the steady beat of their hands kneading dough together, the crackling of fire, and the sizzling of bacon in the pan. Amelia smiled as they worked together. There was something deeply satisfying about the process. Soon, the aroma of the meal being prepared filled the air. The recipe appeared broadly in her mind as she cooked, and for a moment she could hear her mother's voice so clearly and feel her presence as she was reminded of the importance of letting the dough rise, of patience and warmth in preparing meals, and of seasoning with care. By the time the meal was near completion, the first rays of sunlight were peeking through the sky, and sweat beads had gathered on her forehead. "Amelia, what's going on here?" Sarah's familiar voice asked as she stepped into the kitchen, her surprise apparent on her face, and her eyes darted around, taking in the state of the kitchen. "Good morning, Sarah." Amelia gave her a small, tentative smile. "Helen and I were just making breakfast for the family." "Sarah, we don't usually have this thing you're making. I already told Helen what to cook this morning." Sarah threw a glance at Helen, who shrugged and continued tending to the dish. "I understand that, but this is a special meal I'm making. I just missed my mother the previous night, and I woke up thinking of the hearty meal she usually makes for my sister and me most autumn mornings. The family will love it. You'll see." Sarah's lips thinned as she took in the busy kitchen. Her expression soured further, and her frown deepened. "This isn't how things are done. We have a routine here. A lot of people don't take too kindly to sudden changes." Amelia forced a smile. "Sometimes change is good, Sarah. I know you've been trying your best to help me settle into this new life, and I appreciate that. This is my way of introducing my lifestyle and the things I love to the family, so we can all know each other better. Surely, you'd like for me to feel as welcome as possible, wouldn't you?" Amelia asked with raised eyebrows and a steady voice, even though her feet threatened to give way from under her any time soon due to her anxiety. Before Sarah could answer, the children ran excitedly into the kitchen, giggling and shrieking. "Aunt Amelia," they called, their short arms reaching for her. "What's for breakfast?" Amelia crouched down to their height. "All right now, breakfast will be ready soon, but y'all need to wash up first and take your seat in the dining room. Can you do that?" They answered in unison as they obediently filed out of the kitchen, and Sarah followed them with a disapproving look in her eyes, which Amelia ignored. When the kitchen was finally quiet again, a thought popped into Amelia's head. She'd always wondered about the house on the other end of the compound. It looked recently built, but no one ever went there. "Helen, I've been meaning to ask about the other house on the end of the compound. What's it used for?" It's been sitting empty for a spell now, hasn't it? It was originally built for Sarah and her children after her husband died. You see, Mr. Mathers was mostly a traveler, and they never got to build their own house before he died. So, Thomas had it built for her, thinking she'd like her space. But Sarah moved into the main house instead of the one Thomas built for her and her children? I reckon she wanted to be close to her brother and her children to have a father figure in their lives. Sarah and Thomas have always been close siblings, and Thomas adores his sister and her children. This house is big, and it can quickly become lonesome living all alone, so he let them be. Amelia nodded as she made up her mind concerning the matter. She wanted them to move back to the other house so she and Thomas could have more privacy. It didn't seem right that Sarah and her children lived in the same house as she and Thomas, especially when they had a whole house built for them. She didn't mind inviting Sarah and her children to join them for some meals, but she was tired of the overly active house and wanted some space away from the watchful eyes of the family for her and Thomas. She made a mental note to speak to Thomas about it. The table was then set for breakfast, and the family gathered to eat. Thomas's eyes were bright with warmth when he came down from his room, his eyes shining with the familiarity of a man accustomed to early mornings. Their gazes kept sliding toward each other as they ate. "Amelia, this is delicious. I didn't know you cooked so well." Warmth spread through Amelia at his compliment, and everyone at the table agreed with him that her meal was truly fine. "Thank you, Tom. It's my mother's recipe, which I wanted to share with the family. Now, you might have to show me how to make this. What do you say about this old lady coming to you for some cooking lessons?" Martha joked, and Amelia smiled broadly. She turned to Thomas. "Thomas, I was wondering if we could spend some more time together before the wedding. I think it'd do us some good to get to know each other better." He blinked. "Well, what do you suggest we do, Amelia?" A bright smile appeared on her face. "I'd like to see the waterfall. I heard it's a popular spot in Rainbow Falls." Thomas nodded with a smile. "Indeed it is. We can do that, but it'll be after I'm back from my trip. I've got some business in town. After that's settled, we'll make a day of it." Amelia grinned. "Thank you, Thomas. I'd like that very much." Amelia's heart felt light. Today was going so well. Thomas left soon after, leaving her with Sarah and the children. "Amelia, about the wedding," Sarah started. "I was thinking of some of the newest decorations I saw at the market just yesterday. I'm going to send out some invites to some friends at Vine Valley, too. I tell you, it'll be the talk of the town." A tightness formed in Amelia's chest, and she felt the tension build as she took in a deep breath. She didn't want to hurt Sarah's feelings, but she also knew it was now or never to make her stance clear on how she wanted her wedding to go. "Sarah, thank you for all of your efforts and enthusiasm, but I don't want a grand wedding. I'd like a simple one here in the garden, an intimate one, just surrounded by family, something that feels like a true celebration of Thomas and me." Sarah's spoon clattered to the table at Amelia's words. A frown appeared on her face, marring her otherwise pretty features as she looked up at Amelia. "I don't understand. We've done so much already. The dress, the invitations, the decorations. Don't you appreciate everything I've done trying to make this special?" "Of course I do." Amelia's voice trembled as she struggled to keep her frustration and anxiety in check. "But Sarah, this is my wedding. It's supposed to go as I want, not as you or everyone else thinks it should. It's my brother's wedding just as it's yours, and I think—" Amelia cut her off, her temper slipping out of her firm grasp as she threw the napkin in her hand on the table. "That's enough thinking, planning, and dominating, Sarah. You've been doing all of it without ever seeking my opinion, dismissing my words, and forging ahead with yours. You're not the one getting married. It's my wedding, don't you get it? I'm tired of feeling like a guest at my wedding, and I don't want a grand wedding." The words, sharp and cutting, tumbled out of Amelia's mouth before she could stop them. Her legs trembled beneath her when she was done. Her hands clenched firmly at her sides, and her eyes clouded with tears at her own frustrated outburst. Sarah's mouth hung open in shock. Her chair scraped against the floorboards as she ran out of the room. The silence that followed was deafening. Chapter 10. Thomas had been gone longer on his trip to Vine Valley than he intended to. A week had passed since he left Rainbow Falls, but the businesses he had to attend to were matters that couldn't be delayed. Some of the cattle had to be sold off, and there was a need to buy high-quality breeding stock for his ranch. All of the negotiations had taken a longer period to come to a fair deal. Thomas, just like his father, knew the importance of having the best quality over a large stock. The improvement of his herd's genetics for the future of his ranch was one of the responsibilities he took seriously. It didn't matter that it had taken him out of town for a few days. He sighed satisfactorily as he rode Apollo home. The reliable horse dragged the carriage of goods with him, his hooves kicking up dust, leaves, and everything else in his wake. Thomas had fulfilled another demand of his ranch, and though he was very satisfied with the outcome, now his shoulders sagged with tiredness. He yearned to get home quickly, have a warm bath and meal, and lie in his familiar bed tonight. Apollo galloped into the yard, and the first thing that struck Thomas was the silence. He frowned. The family should have been gathering for dinner by this time. The house was usually loud with the children's excited chatter and Sarah telling Uncle Joe and Aunt Martha about the latest gossip in town. Dinner time was a lively occasion in the house, but today it was quiet, eerily so. Silence permeated every corner of the yard. Even as Thomas dismounted his horse, his boots seemed to make a loud thud, disturbing the peace that had settled. Darkus, a ranch hand who loitered around the yard, came to receive him and the carriage. He lowered his gaze and led Apollo away hastily after receiving Thomas's instructions to put the goods away with the other ranch hands. Something had happened while he was gone. A pit formed in Thomas's stomach, and he rubbed the back of his neck while his mind came up with the worst scenarios that could have happened. Did someone get seriously injured? Perhaps Sarah? Or his uncle? One of the children, maybe? Was it Amelia? Was she okay? He shook his head to clear his anxious thoughts as he hurried to the house. He pushed the door open, and the emptiness that greeted him was oppressive. There was no one gathered at the dining table, no clatter of plates in the kitchen, and no chatter ringing in the house. "Sarah?" he called, but no response came, only his voice echoing back at him, hollow and forlorn. Thomas climbed the stairs to her room, and when he entered, he was shocked to find the room empty. All of Sarah's belongings were gone. He went to her children's rooms, and the same emptiness greeted him. What happened? His mind raced. Sir Pearson? Nina, the housekeeper's voice, rang out from below the stairs. "Is that you, sir?" Nina's voice broke through his worried thoughts, and he walked downstairs to meet the older woman. "Nina, what happened here?" The older woman sighed, shaking her head as she narrated everything that happened at the dining table to him. It was a real huge spat, and later that evening, when Sarah came back, it was to take her belongings and her children out of the house. Joe and Martha tried to speak to her, but she was hearing none of it. Her mind was set, and her eyes were bloodshot from crying. Thomas ran a hand through his hair in repetitive motions as he paced down the hall. What he heard was unbelievable. His family had been in disharmony since he left, and he had no idea. Just then, he heard a scuffle of feet outside, and he walked to the windows to see who it was. His eyes fell on Amelia, who was talking in hushed tones to someone else. His gaze flicked to the other person with her, and when he recognized him as Howard, one of Ethan's ranch hands, his jaw clenched. What business did Howard have here of all places? And more so, what business did Amelia have with him? A surge of annoyance flared within him the longer he watched them. Thomas waited until Amelia entered the house, her shoulders slumping as she did, a somber expression on her face. She was about to crash on a chair when she lifted her eyes and saw him. Her eyes widened. "Thomas, you have a lot of explaining to do, Amelia," Thomas said, his voice curt and cold. "Nina told me everything that happened, and now I see you with Ethan's ranch hand. What are you playing at?" She bit her lower lip and shook her head vigorously. "Thomas, please hear me out first." "I'm listening." Amelia took a deep breath before she began. "I know you're upset, but this is all a misunderstanding. Yes, indeed, there was some fuss between Sarah and me, but Sarah, it's difficult to talk to her. She doesn't listen to me. She's made it near impossible for me to have a say, and I tried to talk to her about it. I really did, but it only led to conflict. I lost my head while talking to her." Thomas clicked his teeth together at her words. "You're saying that my sister, who has done nothing but be welcoming and kind to you since she met you at the train station, is the one to blame? How can it be Sarah's fault for trying to help you settle in nicely?" "Thomas, you're not... Amelia, are you trying to break up my family?" He curled his hands into fists. "Would you prefer being a Garrett than being married into the noisy Pearson family? Is that what this fuss is about?" Amelia gasped, and her eyes glared at him with a coldness that he had never seen in her. "Listen to me." He stared at her. Amelia took a step forward, raising her head high. "This is not just about Sarah and your family. It's about you as well. You, the busy rancher who has no time to spend with the woman he's about to marry. I've tried my best to connect with you, but you're so distant. You don't even see how your family's presence has affected the two of us getting to know each other. You keep me at arm's length. All of my efforts to try to talk to you get thwarted at the dining table, and you don't even notice this. You're so oblivious." Her face reddened, and her eyes shone with unshed tears, but she continued. "You hold on so tightly to the past and your pride. Your conflict with Ethan has even led you to accuse me of wanting to be a part of his family, conveniently forgetting that my only other family member alive is now a Garrett." Her throat moved. A tear dropped on her cheek. "Thomas, you accuse me of trying to break up your family, but you're a hypocrite who refuses to see that his anger has done the exact thing he accuses me of, separating me from my only family, my twin sister." Her breaths were loud. The fire in her eyes pinned him to the spot. "So yes, Thomas, this is about Sarah and your family, but it's mostly about you." With that, she stormed off to her room, her door slamming shut loudly behind her. For a moment, Thomas stared at the outline of where she stood, Her words hit hard at him. He sighed as he dropped to the chair heavily. "Dinner's set," Helen called to him from the dining table. Thomas dragged his feet to the dinner table. A pounding headache had taken root, and he placed his head in his hands as he settled into his seat. He idly stirred his spoon into the bowl of soup, his appetite gone. His heart was heavy as he mulled over Amelia's words, the sound of her voice echoing in his head, her brutal reprimands and accusations. Could she be right? Had he truly been oblivious to everything that was happening? Prosody. Too busy to see how she might have been lonely in his large house? Thomas? Helen's gentle voice drew him from his reverie, and he looked up at her understanding eyes. Helen had been with his family since he was a child, and his late mother adored her. She was like a mother to him, and Thomas deeply respected her. Helen poured some water for him as she sat. "You know, I don't talk about most matters if my opinion isn't called for, but it's disheartening to see what's happening in the family." Thomas rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know what to make of it all, Helen. I've had a long week and came home to this." Helen patted his shoulders, a sympathetic look in her eyes. "Thomas, I heard everything that happened. You're not aware of it, but your love for Sarah often blinds you from seeing her flaws. Most people love Sarah, but not everyone can handle her well-meaning but domineering personality. Amelia happens to be part of that group of people. Sarah's dominant nature overwhelms her. It doesn't help that she doesn't feel completely welcome. Yes, Sarah and the family are kind to Amelia, but have they tried to get to know her? She's so overwhelmed by everyone and everything, and you're never here to see it. She doesn't even have a say about her wedding. And you, Thomas, you haven't even spent much time together to know her. It's overwhelming leaving a place she's lived in all her life, but it becomes lonely when you, who promised her marriage and a better life, seem to be distant and everything's controlled by your sister." Helen squeezed his hand. "I trust that you've got good judgment, Thomas, and I know you'll do the right thing." Thomas leaned back in his chair as he reflected on Helen's words. Helen was right, and his faults appeared glaringly to him. A deep sense of shame filled him. He had been distant towards Amelia, using the ranch as an excuse because of his fear of change. It was easier to cope with the fear if he wasn't thinking about it, if he pretended everything was still the same. He'd been a coward. He'd thought if he didn't address them, then it would be as though nothing was happening and his life wasn't about to change in a big way. Yet, his life was about to change, and he was about to marry Amelia and start his own family. He was going to take on new responsibilities and vows he couldn't go back on. His shoulders dropped. Amelia was very upset with him. No doubt about that. Did she like him at all, or was she only disappointed in him? He had promised her a happy life, but things seemed to have disappointed her so far. His headache continued to worsen with these thoughts, and he closed his eyes. A moment later, a sharp knock sounded on the door. Chapter 11. Tears rolled down Amelia's cheeks as she curled up in her bed, her arms wrapped around herself tightly. Her heart ached at the way everything had turned out. Thomas's accusations had hurt her, and she had hurled angry words at him without thinking. She didn't know what this meant for their future, and it made her stomach churn. She had come to Rainbow Falls, wild-eyed and bushy-tailed, to start a new life with Thomas. Oh, how naive she was. Amelia pressed a hand to her chest as her sobs racked her body. Her dreams were crumbling around her, and there seemed to be nothing she could do about it. She bit her lip, letting the tears flow freely. She was drained and tired of fighting her emotions. "What are you doing here?" Thomas's voice boomed from downstairs, breaking the silence in the house. She stilled when his raised voice reached her ears. Who was he speaking to with such anger? Her heart skipped a beat when she heard Ethan's voice. Amelia sat up, blew her nose into a napkin, and wiped her tears away with the back of her hands. Things were already bad enough, and now Ethan's presence would only make everything worse. Amelia rushed downstairs. "I saw Jesse's letter," she heard Ethan say when she reached the foot of the stairs, and next to him in the middle of the parlor was Ursula. "Ursula," she breathed her name, relief flooding through her body upon seeing her twin. "Wait with your sister." This might take a while. Ursula nodded at Ethan's words, and the sisters rushed to embrace each other. Amelia led her to a couch where they could see the men through the window as they talked. Do you think they'll work things out? Amelia tried to keep her voice steady, but it came out shaky, the aftermath of the arguments and sobs lingering in her voice. I hope so, for all our sakes. I want to be hopeful, but so much is happening. I feel like it's all slipping from my hands. Ursula leaned in, her tone gentle when she spoke. You're getting married soon, aren't you? Your relationship should be something to hold on to, at least. Amelia stared down at her hands to avoid letting Ursula see her teary eyes. I don't know, Ursula. I don't even know if we'll get married. I don't think Thomas loves me, at least not like Ethan loves you. Ursula drew her close, brushing a tear from Amelia's cheeks. Amelia's voice cracked with emotion as she continued. I don't think we can have a happy life together. He doesn't seem to want me. The talk of love is far-fetched. We've only known each other for a short time, but we've had so many troubles already. It makes my heart ache. Amelia, love isn't always easy to see, especially when there's so much pain and anger. But I see the way Thomas looks at you. There's something there. Just give it time to grow. She sighed when she looked up to meet Ursula's sympathetic eyes. I hope you're right. I want to believe that. Between his large family and the little time we spend together, it's hard, but I'll try to believe it. Please try. Don't give up. You deserve to be happy. Ursula gave her a reassuring smile, and Amelia returned her smile. We both do. But not even Ursula's presence could quell the worries that plagued Amelia. She knew things weren't going well, and Ursula was reassuring her in the best way she could, but Ursula didn't really know what it was like in Amelia's shoes. Amelia's heart ached as she thought of the worst-case scenarios that could happen if her relationship with Thomas crumbled. Maybe she would live with Ursula for a while until she figured out what to do next. Or perhaps she would get married to someone else. After all, there were many bachelors in Rainbow Falls eager to get married. She could start working, maybe learn a trade, and open her shop in town. However, each thought broke her heart. This wasn't how she imagined her life in Rainbow Falls would turn out. She'd had high hopes for her new life. She thought she would find love and happiness here, but reality was harsh, leaving only the anguish of unfulfilled dreams and expectations. This was what she grieved the most. The dreams she clung to and the hopes that kept her adrift through the nights at their cramped apartment on the Lower East Side. After what seemed like an eternity, the men returned to the house. Amelia glanced at Thomas, and their eyes held. A tentative smile appeared on his face. We've decided to share the stream, Ethan said, and beside her, Ursula heaved a sigh of relief. Thank you, Ursula. Amelia. Ethan turned to her as he continued. Without you two, we wouldn't have gotten over the past. A lot has happened, but we can take comfort in the fact that we're all here. They all nodded. His words were true and brought a painful feud to a close. Even with everything that had happened, Amelia was proud of Thomas for putting aside his pride and doing what was right for them all. Ursula and Ethan left after Amelia promised that she and Thomas would come for dinner at their home sometime. An awkward silence ensued following their absence, and Amelia turned to go back to her room. Amelia, Thomas's voice, low and earnest, stopped her in her tracks. He walked to her, gently turning her to face him, but she didn't look at him. Amelia feared she would begin to cry again if she met his eyes. Amelia, please look at me. His voice was barely a whisper, and she could hear the resignation in it. She looked up to meet him, and there was a vulnerability in his silver depths that surprised her. He had always worn a cold mask of control, but tonight he looked soft, tired, and vulnerable. He took a step away from her, giving her some space. I know we've hurt each other with our words, and I've hurt you more. After all, I did promise you a happy life and vowed to make life easier for you before you came here. I know I haven't been fair to you. I can see that now. I've been oblivious to the affairs of my household without much thought about how they might affect you. Amelia's lips parted with Thomas's words, and she took a breath to steady her overwhelming emotions. Thomas, I didn't come here expecting everything to be easy, but I did hope. I prayed to be able to build a happy and loving life with you. I wanted it more after I saw you. A real life Thomas. A couple that knew and loved each other, not just two people living under the same roof. Thomas smiled, his eyes never leaving hers. I know. I've been thinking about your words, and you're right. I've been so wrapped up in my fears, and that's got to change. I'm getting married to you. We ought to get to know each other and spend more time together like husband and wife. I truly want to know you, Amelia. A flutter rose in her belly as she searched his eyes. The way his silver eyes shone with sincerity and the renewed determination in his voice. Could she dare to hope again? Maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of something new and true. A floating sensation soared through her body, like her burdens were being removed. The next afternoon, Amelia visited Sarah's house on the other end of the yard. Thomas had gone to their extended family's place at Sunset Vale, a neighboring town where he'd suspected Sarah was, and Sarah and her children had returned to the ranch. Amelia knew she needed to have a conversation with her and for them to come to an understanding. Sarah was Thomas's sister, and she knew how much they loved each other, just like she and Ursula. She did like Sarah and appreciated her energetic spirit, but all she wanted was some space and for her opinions to be heard. She knocked softly on the door, and a moment later, Sarah appeared. Her wavy hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she had a small smile on her face. "Come on in," she said, stepping aside. Amelia walked in, clasping her hands together. "It's good to have you back home." "Well, it's good to be home," Sarah replied as she motioned for her to take a seat. "I suppose we have some matters to discuss." Amelia nodded. "Sarah, I'd like to start by saying that I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I've reflected on my words, and they were harsh and hurtful. I'm sorry. Thank you for apologizing." Amelia reached out to take Sarah's hands in hers. "I truly appreciate all of your help. You've been so genuinely kind and helpful to me, but I also need to find my way here. I'm getting married to your brother, and I'll have my responsibilities as his wife. And for me to do that, I should be able to have some control, to take charge of my own home and have a voice. I really do want us to be friends, real friends. I want us to do things together, not just you taking the reins all the time." There was a small pause in the air before Sarah nodded. "I understand, Amelia. I hadn't thought about how my actions might come off as overbearing and domineering. I've spent the past week thinking about it, and I suppose you're valid for feeling that way. It's just that I've been running things my way for so long. I didn't stop to listen to what you preferred to do differently. I'm sorry too, Amelia, and I'd like for us to be friends." Amelia's throat choked with emotion as they embraced. A wave of relief swept through her. "I do have some ideas for the wedding," Amelia said, and Sarah's face lightened up. "Well, pray tell. Whatever it is, we'll make it happen." Amelia laughed at her enthusiasm. The two women spent the rest of the afternoon coming up with plans for the wedding and giggling at the ideas they liked. There was a sense of camaraderie growing between them, and it warmed Amelia's heart. She realized that this was what she yearned for. This was what was missing all this while: a partnership, a friendship, a sense of belonging. Now, as she looked across at Sarah, she smiled broadly, and she knew she was finally beginning to find it. Epilogue. The air was crisp that evening, the kind that told you that autumn had arrived with all its earthy scent and light sweetness. A gentle breeze brushed past, and the sounds of ruffling leaves followed. Amelia smiled as she nestled closer to Thomas on the couch, her head resting against his broad shoulders and his arms wrapped around her. He had built the couch by himself as his wedding present to her, so that they could watch the sky together whenever she wanted. It almost brought Amelia to tears when he told her. The aroma of the logs burning in the hearth inside mixed with his sandalwood scent. It was a night that spelled peace to her. Amelia knew that this was such a night that would be etched in her memory forever, one she would go to when she needed strength, when she needed reassurance, one that would make her smile broadly. "Tom, look up. Can you see those clusters of stars?" she asked in an animated voice as she pointed to the sky. It was punctuated with glittering stars, and the moon shone brightly up above. "That's the great tortoise, and with it is a heavy carriage. He's carrying gifts for his wife. You see, He's been away from home for more than 20 years. Thomas laughed, a deep sound that rumbled through his chest. Why was he away for so long? For work. The great tortoise is, after all, a dedicated family man, and he needed to provide for his family. But a great adversity met him that he had to conquer. Now he's on his way, but this carriage slows him down, and he can't give up. All of his noble lady's favorite things are there. He's almost home now. The noble lady's waiting for him at home, I reckon. No, she's waiting for him at a secret garden that only they know about, just like the one we got married in today. A garden where the flowers never wilt and the moonlight shines its glorious light on them. Thomas patted her hair softly. Sounds like the perfect place for a wedding, just like ours. It was perfect, wasn't it? She looked up at him with a contented smile. The dress, the decorations, the flowers, the glow of the sunset as we said our vows, I loved every moment. So did I, and I'll cherish that moment forever and every moment with you. You looked breathtaking in your dress, Amelia. I've never seen a more beautiful woman. I might just be the luckiest man alive, I'd say. Amelia blushed, covering her face with her hands. Oh, Thomas. Her heart swelled with love for this man, who had rocked her world and somehow held her firmly in place. She'd thought she wanted a different life than the one he offered, but she couldn't be happier and more content with this beautiful life with him. He was here, and she was his, and somehow that was all that mattered. I love you, Amelia, he whispered, taking her face in his hands. The butterflies in her stomach took flight now, fluttering their wings as they danced around in happiness, and tears of joy filled her eyes. I love you too, Thomas. A slow, tender smile spread across Thomas's face, and he leaned down, brushing his lips against hers in a kiss that was as soft and sweet as the night breeze. It was a kiss that spoke of trust, promises, and love that would only grow stronger with time. Amelia sighed contentedly when she looked back up at the sky. She knew with a certainty that this was where she was meant to be, right here in Thomas's arms, on the porch of their large ranch, under a blanket of stars. The end.